They thought I didn't hear them. But I did. Every single word. I was standing in my parents' kitchen reaching for a glass of water when I heard my father's voice drifting through the doorway. "Christmas is going to be perfect," he said. "Brooke won't know what hit her." Then my sister Amber laughed that cruel, satisfied laugh I'd heard my entire life. "She deserves it, Dad. Let's make sure everyone sees what a failure she really is." My own family, planning to humiliate me in front of everyone we knew. For 30 years I had been their punching bag, the daughter who was never good enough, the sister who was always compared and found lacking. I had taken their insults, their dismissals, their cruelty, and I had stayed silent. But not anymore. What they didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. So that night when my father called me screaming, "Where the hell are you?" I answered with perfect calm. Take a guess. Did the family enjoy the gift I left behind? And when they opened that box, my sister's scream echoed through the house. "Oh my God! What is this?" That was just the beginning. What I did next would destroy everything they thought they knew about me, every secret they buried, every lie they told, every penny they thought was safe. By the end of Christmas night, my father would be on his knees, and my family would never look at me the same way again. This is my story. And if you stay until the end, you'll see exactly how a so-called failure brought an entire family to its knees. Part 1. The dinner that changed everything. My name is Brooke Whitmore. I am 42 years old, and for the past 15 years I have built a life that my family knows nothing about. On paper, I run a small consulting business, at least that is what I tell them. The truth is far more complicated, but I learned a long time ago that the less my family knows about my real life, the safer I am. I pulled into my parents' driveway that evening with the same knot in my stomach I always felt when visiting. The house looked warm and inviting from the outside with its manicured lawn and tasteful holiday decorations. But I knew better. Behind those walls lived people who had spent my entire life making me feel like I was never quite enough. When I walked through the front door, my mother barely looked up from arranging flowers on the dining table. My father was already seated reading something on his phone. And my younger sister Amber stood by the window, her perfectly styled hair catching the light as she turned to acknowledge my arrival with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Brooke," my mother said flatly, "you made it." "Of course I made it," I replied, keeping my voice pleasant. "I told you I would be here at 6. Nobody moved to greet me. Nobody offered to take my coat. And when I looked at the dining table, I felt something cold settle in my chest. There were 4 place settings, but one of them was pushed to the corner almost as an afterthought while the other 3 were arranged together at the head of the table. The message was clear without anyone saying a word. I was present, but I was not truly welcome. "I hope you don't mind," my mother said, not sounding like she cared whether I minded or not. "We ran out of the good china, so you'll have to make do with one of the everyday plates." Amber let out a small laugh. "Well, it's not like Brooke would notice the difference anyway. She's never exactly had refined taste." My father finally looked up from his phone. "Let's not start the evening with arguments," he said, though his tone suggested he found Amber's comment more amusing than offensive. "Brooke, sit down. We've been waiting." They had not been waiting. The appetizers were untouched, and the wine had not been poured. But I said nothing. I had learned decades ago that defending myself only made things worse. Dinner proceeded exactly as I expected. My mother made pointed comments about how some people never seem to settle down with a good husband. My father asked questions about my work that were designed to highlight my apparent lack of impressive achievements. And Amber talked endlessly about her successful real estate business, her beautiful home, and her plans for an extravagant vacation. Through it all, I smiled and nodded and gave vague answers. I had become an expert at revealing nothing while appearing to participate. About an hour into the meal, I excused myself to get water from the kitchen. The conversation had shifted to holiday plans, and I needed a moment to breathe. As I stood at the sink filling my glass, I heard voices drifting from the hallway just beyond the kitchen door. My father's voice came first low but distinct. "Christmas is going to be perfect. Everything is arranged." Then Amber responded, and the cruelty in her tone made my hand freeze on the faucet. "The mock award is ready. I had it engraved and everything. When we present it to her in front of everyone, she'll finally understand what we all think of her." My heart stopped. I stood completely still, barely breathing as their conversation continued. "The speech needs to be subtle enough that we can claim it was a joke afterward," my father said. "But make sure everyone gets the message. Brooke has always thought she was better than this family. It's time to remind her of her place." Amber laughed softly. "Don't worry, Dad. By the time we're done, she'll be so humiliated she won't show her face at another family gathering for years." I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning white. For a moment, the room seemed to spin around me. I had always suspected that my family resented me, but hearing them plan my public humiliation with such casual cruelty was something entirely different. When I finally found the strength to move, I crept toward the doorway and peered into the hallway. My father was standing near the living room, his back to me, and I watched as he glanced around to make sure no one was watching. Then he moved to the liquor cabinet, reached behind a row of expensive bottles, and opened a hidden safe I had never known existed. His expression as he looked inside was tense and guarded. Whatever that safe contained, it was important enough to hide from everyone, including his own family. I pulled back before he could see me, my mind racing. But as I turned to retreat to the dining room, I noticed someone watching me from the far end of the kitchen. Mrs. Chen, our family's housekeeper for as long as I could remember, stood silently by the pantry door. She was in her 60s now, her hair streaked with gray, and she had always treated me with quiet kindness that contrasted sharply with my family's coldness. Our eyes met, and in that moment I saw something I had never noticed before. Sympathy. Deep knowing sympathy. And something else, something that almost looked like encouragement. She gave me the smallest nod, then turned and disappeared into the pantry. I walked back to the dining table, sat down in my corner seat, and finished the meal with perfect composure. My family continued their conversation as though nothing had happened, never suspecting that everything had changed. When dinner ended, I said my goodbyes with the same polite smile I always wore. My mother barely acknowledged my departure. My father grunted something about seeing me at Christmas, and Amber reminded me not to be late to the party. I walked out of that house with my head held high and my heart pounding with cold fury. Once I reached my car, I sat in the darkness for a long moment, letting the reality of what I had heard settle into my bones. They wanted to humiliate me. They had been planning it for weeks, and they fully expected me to stand there and take it just like I always had. But they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated me. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to a contact I rarely used, and pressed call. When the voice on the other end answered, I spoke 4 words that would set everything in motion. "We begin tonight." Part 2. A family that never saw me. The drive back to my apartment took 45 minutes, but I barely noticed the passing streetlights or the other cars on the highway. My mind was somewhere else entirely, decades in the past, reliving the moments that had shaped me into the woman I had become. People often ask me why I keep my distance from my family. They assume there must have been some dramatic event, some singular betrayal that drove us apart. But the truth is far more insidious. My family did not break me with one devastating blow. They wore me down over years through thousands of small cuts that never quite healed. From my earliest memories, I understood that my younger sister Amber was the favored child. She was born when I was 4 years old, and from the moment she arrived, it was as though I ceased to exist. My parents doted on her, every smile, every gurgle, every tiny accomplishment. When she took her first steps, they threw a celebration. When I had taken mine 4 years earlier, there were no photographs to commemorate it. As we grew older, the disparity became impossible to ignore. Amber was invited to family gatherings, holiday events, and special dinners with relatives. I was often told to stay home because there was not enough room in the car, or because the event was not suitable for older children, or because I would be bored. The excuses varied, but the message was always the same. I was not wanted. When I did well in school, my parents barely acknowledged it. I remember bringing home a report card with straight A's when I was 12 years old. I was so proud, so certain that this time they would notice my effort. My father glanced at the grades, grunted something about how academics came easy to me, so it was not a real achievement, and then spent the next 20 minutes praising Amber for getting a B in a subject she had been struggling with. That was the pattern of my childhood. My accomplishments were minimized or dismissed. Amber's were celebrated and magnified. I learned to stop expecting recognition and started achieving things purely for myself. But there was one person who saw me. My grandmother. My mother's mother was the only adult in my life who ever made me feel like I mattered. She was a quiet woman who had lived through difficult times, and she understood something about strength that my parents never grasped. She saw my drawings and paintings when I was young, and instead of dismissing them like everyone else, she encouraged me. "You have a gift, Brooke," she told me once when I was 14. "Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. The world will try to make you small. Do not let it." She passed away when I was 16, and her death left a hole in my life that has never fully closed. But before she died, she gave me advice that would guide everything I did afterward. "Quiet wealth," she said, holding my hand in her frail fingers. "That is the secret. Do not boast, do not announce. Just build your strength in silence, and let your actions speak when the time is right." I did not fully understand what she meant at the time, but I would come to understand it very well. The memory that still cuts deepest happened when I was 17 years old. I had been working on an art portfolio for months, pouring my heart and soul into pieces that I hoped would earn me a scholarship to a prestigious art school. My grandmother had seen early versions of the work before she passed, and her encouragement had fueled my determination. That spring, my school held an art exhibition. I entered my best piece, a large mixed-media work that explored themes of identity and belonging. It was deeply personal, and I was terrified to show it publicly. But I submitted it anyway, hoping that maybe this time my parents would see what I was capable of. The night of the exhibition, I stood beside my work and waited. The judges walked through the gallery examining each piece carefully. And when they announced the winners, my name was called first. I had won the top prize. I was elated. For one brief shining moment, I felt like all my hard work had been validated. I looked around the room for my parents, certain they would be there to share in my triumph. They were not there. They had never come. I drove home alone that night, clutching my award certificate, still hoping that maybe I could share the news and they would be proud of me. But when I walked through the front door, I found my parents and Amber in the living room celebrating. Amber had performed a simple piano piece at a recital earlier that evening, and they were treating her like she had won a Grammy. "Mom, Dad," I said, holding up my certificate, "I won first prize at the art exhibition." My mother barely glanced at me. "That's nice, dear. Did you see how well Amber did tonight? Her teacher said she was the best performer." I stood there invisible while my family continued celebrating my sister for something unremarkable, while my genuine achievement meant nothing to them. That night, I cried alone in my room until I had no tears left. But the breaking point came 2 weeks later. I had left my art portfolio on the kitchen table, planning to work on it after school. When I came home, I found my father in the kitchen holding the pieces in his hands. For one foolish second, I thought he was admiring them. Then he tore them in half. "This is garbage," he said, dropping the destroyed pieces onto the floor. "You are wasting your time with this nonsense. No daughter of mine is going to embarrass this family by pretending to be some kind of artist. You need to focus on something practical. Stop being so delusional." I looked at my mother standing in the doorway. She said nothing. She did not defend me. She did not tell him to stop. She simply looked away as she always did. Something inside me died that day. but something else was born, a determination so fierce that nothing would ever extinguish it. I decided then that I would never depend on my family for anything. I would build my own life, my own success, and I would do it in silence, just as my grandmother had advised. I left home the day I turned 18. I worked multiple jobs, put myself through college, and started building a future that belonged only to me. My family assumed I was struggling, scraping by, never amounting to anything significant. I let them believe it. The less they knew, the safer I was. Now, 24 years later, I pulled into the parking garage of my building, a luxury high-rise in the most exclusive part of the city. I took the private elevator to the penthouse floor and walked into an apartment that would have made my parents' jaws drop. I crossed the living room to a hidden panel behind my bookshelf. Inside was a safe, much like the one my father kept hidden behind his liquor cabinet. But the contents of my safe told a very different story. I entered the code and the door swung open. Inside were documents, investment portfolios, property deeds, and bank statements that represented the life I had built in secret. My family thought I was a failure. They thought I was the daughter who never amounted to anything. They had no idea that I was worth more than all of them combined. I stood before the open safe, letting the weight of what I was looking at settle over me. Rows of neatly organized folders bound documents and several external hard drives filled the space. To anyone else, it might have looked like ordinary paperwork, but each item represented years of sacrifice, strategy, and silent determination. My family believed I worked as a small-time consultant, barely making ends meet. They imagined me living in a modest apartment, driving a used car, struggling to pay bills like so many people do. I had carefully cultivated that image, never correcting their assumptions, never revealing the truth. The truth was that I am the founder and CEO of 3 separate companies. The first is an artificial intelligence technology firm that develops software for healthcare systems. We started in a tiny office with 4 employees, and now we operate in 12 states with contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. The second is a real estate investment company that owns commercial properties in 3 major cities. I built it from nothing, buying distressed properties during the market downturn and transforming them into valuable assets. The third is Knight Strategies, a consulting firm that advises corporations on restructuring and crisis management. It is the company I am most publicly associated with, though even there I maintain a low profile. 5 years ago, I sold my first startup, a data analytics company I had founded in my late 20s, for $15 million. That sale gave me the capital to expand my other ventures and solidify my financial independence. By any measure, I had achieved remarkable success. Yet I drove a 10-year-old Honda. I wore clothes from department stores. I lived in this penthouse, not because it was flashy, but because the building offered privacy and security that other places could not match. From the outside, nothing about my life suggested wealth. This was not an accident. This was a deliberate choice. I reached into the safe and pulled out a small photograph that I kept tucked behind the documents. It showed my grandmother, taken about a year before she died. She was sitting in her garden surrounded by flowers she had planted herself, smiling at the camera with that knowing expression I remembered so well. Grandma Rose had understood something about the world that most people never grasp. She had grown up poor during the Depression, married a man who worked himself into an early grave, and raised 3 children largely on her own. By the time I knew her, she had built a comfortable life through decades of quiet, persistent effort. She owned her home outright. She had savings that would have surprised anyone who saw her simple lifestyle, and she never once boasted about any of it. "The loudest people in the room are usually the weakest," she told me once. "Real strength does not need to announce itself. Real wealth does not need to be displayed. Build your power in silence, Brooke. Let your actions speak only when they need to." That philosophy had guided every decision I made since leaving my parents' house at 18. I had built my empire brick by brick, year by year, never drawing attention to myself. When my companies succeeded, I did not give interviews or pose for magazine covers. When I acquired new properties, I did so through holding companies that obscured my involvement. Even my employees at Knight Strategies did not fully understand the extent of my holdings. And my family had no idea. They still saw me as the disappointing daughter, the one who never measured up to Amber, the one who would never amount to anything. Every dismissive comment they made, every condescending question about my work, every assumption about my struggles, I absorbed it all without correction. Let them believe what they wanted to believe. Their ignorance was my protection. Because I knew my family. If they ever discovered how much money I had, they would descend on me like vultures. My father would suddenly want to invest in my businesses. My mother would expect expensive gifts and financial support. And Amber would find ways to insert herself into my life, claiming sisterly closeness that had never existed, all while calculating how much she could extract from me. I had seen it happen to others. Successful people whose families emerged from the woodwork the moment wealth became apparent, demanding money, creating drama, draining resources and energy until there was nothing left. I had protected myself from that fate by becoming invisible. I placed the photograph back in the safe and began removing the documents I needed. There were property transfer agreements for buildings I owned in Chicago and Denver. There were investment contracts showing my stakes in several growing companies. There were bank statements from accounts in 3 different institutions, each one showing balances that would have seemed impossible to the struggling consultant my family imagined me to be. But I was not looking for those tonight. I was looking for a different folder entirely. I found it near the back of the safe, a thick manila folder labeled simply with my parents' names and the current year. I had been building this file for nearly 6 months, ever since my business network first alerted me to something interesting. My parents were in serious financial trouble. The documents inside told a disturbing story. My father had been refinancing their home repeatedly over the past decade, pulling out equity to fund a lifestyle they could not actually afford. He had taken loans against the property multiple times, each one larger than the last, until the debt far exceeded the home's value. There were also records of falsified income documents. My father had exaggerated his earnings to qualify for credit he should never have received. I had discovered all of this through contacts in the banking industry. When you own a real estate investment company, you develop relationships with people who have access to information. A few discreet inquiries had revealed that my parents were teetering on the edge of financial ruin, putting on a show of prosperity while drowning in debt behind closed doors. For months, I had simply watched and waited, unsure what to do with this information. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction that their facade was crumbling. Another part felt something closer to pity. But after what I had overheard at dinner tonight, a new possibility had begun forming in my mind. They wanted to humiliate me publicly. They wanted to destroy my dignity in front of everyone we knew. And they believed they could do it because they thought I was powerless. They were wrong. I spread the documents across my dining table, studying the numbers, tracing the timeline of their financial collapse. Everything I needed was here. The question was, how to use it. My phone buzzed, interrupting my thoughts. I glanced at the screen and felt my jaw tighten. It was Amber, and when I answered, her voice was sweeter than honey. "Brooke, I just wanted to check in on you. Are you okay? You seemed a little quiet at dinner tonight." I held the phone to my ear, letting Amber's saccharine voice wash over me, while I stared at the financial documents spread across my table. The contrast was almost poetic, my sister's fake concern filling my ears while evidence of our family's hidden desperation lay before my eyes. "I just worry about you sometimes," Amber continued, her tone dripping with manufactured warmth. "You left dinner so quickly tonight. I wanted to make sure everything was all right." I almost laughed. Amber had never once in our entire lives called to check on my well-being. She had never worried about me, never considered my feelings, never treated me as anything other than an inconvenience or a target. But here she was, playing the role of the caring sister, and I knew exactly why. She wanted to make sure I would show up to the Christmas party. She needed me there for their plan to work. "I'm fine," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Just tired. It was a long drive." Of course," Amber said quickly. I completely understand. These family dinners can be exhausting, can't they? But I'm so glad you're coming to the Christmas party. It's going to be such a special night. Everyone will be there. There it was, the subtle emphasis on everyone. She wanted me to know there would be an audience. Whatever they had planned, it was designed for maximum public impact. I wouldn't miss it, I replied. Wonderful. Have you thought about what you're going to wear? I know fashion isn't really your thing, but maybe I could help you pick something out. We could go shopping together if you want. My treat. The offer was so transparent it was almost insulting. Amber had never offered to take me shopping in our entire lives. She was fishing for information, trying to gauge my state of mind, perhaps even hoping to control what I wore so I would look appropriately pathetic when they executed their plan. That's very kind of you, I said, but I already have something picked out. Oh, really? What is it? Something nice, I hope? You know how Mom and Dad feel about dressing appropriately for these events? I could hear the condescension beneath her words. She was already imagining me showing up in something cheap and unflattering, confirming every assumption our family held about my failed life. It's appropriate, I said simply. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I could sense Amber recalibrating, trying a different approach. Well, just don't be late. Okay, you know how Dad gets when people aren't punctual. The party starts at 7, but you should probably arrive a little early. There's going to be a special presentation this year, and I know Dad wants everyone there for it. A special presentation. I filed that information away, though it only confirmed what I had already overheard in the kitchen. I'll be there on time, I assured her. Good, good. Another pause. Then Amber's voice took on a slightly different quality, excited, almost giddy, as though she couldn't quite contain herself. I hope you're ready for your big moment on stage. Dad has put a lot of work into making this year's party memorable. My big moment on stage. The words hung in the air between us, and for just a second, I could hear the real Amber beneath the performance. She was looking forward to this. She was anticipating my humiliation with genuine pleasure. I'm sure he has, I said. He's been planning it for weeks, actually. You know how he gets when he sets his mind to something. Once he decides on a plan, there's no talking him out of it. This was interesting. Amber's tone had shifted slightly. There was something almost defensive in the way she mentioned our father's role. She was distancing herself from the plan, positioning herself as merely following his lead rather than being an active architect of my destruction. I wondered if that was true. Had our father conceived this scheme entirely on his own, with Amber simply going along as she always did? Or was she trying to create plausible deniability in case things went wrong? Either way, it revealed something important about their dynamic. Amber was not the mastermind here. She was a participant, perhaps even an eager one, but she was operating under our father's direction. She had been playing the role he assigned her for so long that she probably did not even recognize it anymore. I'm always ready, I said quietly. There was silence on the other end of the line. I could almost feel Amber's confusion through the phone. She had expected me to sound nervous, anxious, perhaps even desperate for more information about what was being planned. My calm response did not fit the script she had prepared. Well, she said finally, her sweet tone faltering slightly. That's good. That's really good. I just wanted to make sure you knew how important this party is to the family. We all want it to go perfectly. I'm sure it will be unforgettable, I said. Another pause. Right. Okay. Well, I should let you get some rest. Long drive and everything. I'll see you at the party, Brooke. Goodbye, Amber. I ended the call and set the phone down on the table, my mind working through everything I had just heard. The conversation had confirmed the broad outlines of their plan, a public spectacle, something on stage designed to humiliate me in front of the entire community. But it had also revealed something I had not fully considered before. Amber was not simply evil. She was complicit, certainly. She was cruel in ways that came naturally to her after a lifetime of being rewarded for treating me poorly. But she was also following a pattern that had been established long before she was old enough to make her own choices. Our father had shaped her into his instrument, and she had accepted that role because it came with love and approval and belonging, all the things I had been denied. I did not forgive her. I was not sure I ever could. But I began to see her differently in that moment. She was not just a villain in my story. She was also a product of the same toxic family that had damaged me, shaped by different pressures, but ultimately trapped in her own way. This realization would matter later when I had to decide what kind of justice I truly wanted. For now, though, I had more immediate concerns. I gathered the financial documents from the table and organized them back into their folder. Then I opened my laptop and began composing an email to Margaret Chen, my lawyer, and one of the few people who knew the full extent of my resources. I had been monitoring my parents' financial situation for months, waiting to see how things would develop. 3 months ago, I had instructed Margaret to begin preliminary work on acquiring their mortgage debt from the bank. It was a complex transaction requiring patience and discretion, but everything was now in place. The bank was willing to sell the distressed debt. My holding company was ready to purchase it. All that remained was my authorization to proceed. After tonight, after what I had overheard and what Amber had just confirmed, there was no longer any reason to wait. I typed carefully, choosing my words with precision. Margaret, it's time to activate the acquisition. Move forward with the mortgage purchase immediately. I want full ownership transferred to Knight Strategies LLC before the end of the week. I read the message twice, then pressed send. The game had officially begun. Margaret Chen called me back within the hour. I had expected to wait until morning, but Margaret was not the kind of lawyer who let important matters sit overnight. She had built her career on responsiveness and precision qualities that had made her invaluable to me over the years. I received your email, she said without preamble. Are you certain you want to proceed? I am. Then we should meet. Tonight, if possible. There are documents that require your signature, and I have additional information you need to see before we finalize anything. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 10 in the evening, but Margaret's office was only 20 minutes away, and I knew she would be there regardless of the hour. That was simply who she was. I'll be there in half an hour, I said. Margaret Chen had been my lawyer for nearly 15 years, but she was much more than that. She had become a mentor, an advisor, and in many ways the mother figure I had never truly had. Now, in her mid-60s, she possessed a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue, with decades of experience navigating complex financial and legal situations. She had seen me grow from a struggling young entrepreneur into the businesswoman I was today, and she understood my family situation better than almost anyone. When I arrived at her office, she was waiting with a pot of tea and a stack of folders arranged neatly on her conference table. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in her characteristic bun, and her reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. She looked tired but alert, her eyes carrying the focused intensity I had come to rely on. Sit down, she said, gesturing to a chair. We have a lot to discuss. I took my seat and accepted the cup of tea she poured for me. The warmth was comforting, but I was not here for comfort. I was here for information. Margaret opened the first folder and spread several documents across the table. Your parents' financial situation is worse than we initially estimated. Over the past 12 years, they have refinanced their home 7 times. Each refinancing pulled out additional equity, which they used to fund their lifestyle vacations. Cars, your sister's business ventures, various investments that did not pan out. I studied the documents as she spoke. The numbers were staggering. My parents had transformed what should have been a fully paid-off home into a debt trap that now exceeded the property's market value by nearly 40%. There's more, Margaret continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. During the 4th refinancing approximately 6 years ago, your father submitted income documentation that was materially false. He inflated his earnings by nearly 60% to qualify for the loan amount he wanted. The bank accepted the documents without proper verification their error, but the falsification itself constitutes fraud. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. My father had always presented himself as a pillar of integrity, a respected member of the community who looked down on those he considered beneath him. Now I had proof that his entire lifestyle was built on lies. The debt acquisition we initiated 3 months ago is ready to be finalized, Margaret said, pulling out another set of documents. The bank has agreed to sell the entire mortgage portfolio to Knight Strategies LLC at 73 cents on the dollar. Once you sign these papers, you will become the legal holder of your parents' debt. Every payment they make will go to your company. And if they default, you will have the right to initiate foreclosure proceedings. I picked up the documents and began reading through them carefully. Every clause was precisely worded, every contingency accounted for. Margaret had done her usual thorough work. "Before you sign," she said, leaning back in her chair, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." I looked up from the papers. "Go ahead." "Why are you doing this? I have known you for 15 years, Brooke. You are not a cruel person. You do not seek revenge for its own sake. So tell me, what is your actual intention here?" I set down the documents and considered her question carefully. Margaret deserved an honest answer. "I am not doing this to destroy them," I said finally. "If I wanted to destroy them, I could have done it years ago. I have had the resources and the information to ruin their lives completely, and I have chosen not to use them." "Then what do you want?" "Accountability," I said. "For 42 years, my family has treated me as worthless. They have belittled me, excluded me, and made me feel like I do not matter. And they have done it without any consequences whatsoever. They believe they can continue treating me this way forever because they think I am powerless to stop them." I paused, gathering my thoughts. What I overheard tonight proves they are planning to humiliate me publicly. They want to destroy whatever dignity I have left in front of everyone we know, and they expect me to just accept it like I have accepted everything else. Margaret nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "I am not going to destroy them," I continued, "but I am going to make them understand that their actions have consequences. For the first time in their lives, they are going to face the reality that I am not the weak, failed daughter they believe me to be. And if they continue to attack me, they will discover just how much power I actually have." Margaret studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "That is what I needed to hear. You are approaching this with a clear mind, not blind emotion. That gives me confidence that you will handle whatever comes next with wisdom." She slid the documents across the table toward me along with a pen. "Sign where indicated. Once these are processed, you will have complete legal control over your parents' mortgage." I signed each document carefully, initialing where required, dating each page. With each signature, I felt the balance of power shifting. My family had no idea what was coming. "There is one more thing," Margaret said as I finished signing the final page. "I discovered something interesting while reviewing the full mortgage history. Your sister Amber's name appears on documents from 3 years ago. She co-signed a home equity loan that your parents used to fund her real estate business startup." I looked up sharply. "Amber is financially tied to the house." "Legally, yes. If your parents default and you exercise foreclosure rights, Amber's credit would be affected as well. More importantly, it means she has been more involved in your family's financial schemes than she may have admitted to anyone, possibly even to herself." This was unexpected information. I had assumed Amber was simply a beneficiary of our parents' favoritism, not an active participant in their financial arrangements. But if her name was on loan documents, she was complicit in ways that went beyond mere passive acceptance. I gathered the signed documents and handed them back to Margaret. "Prepare the foreclosure paperwork as well. I do not intend to use it unless absolutely necessary, but I want the option available." "Understood. I will have everything ready within 48 hours. I thanked Margaret and gathered my things to leave. As I walked toward the door, my phone buzzed violently in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a text message from my father, the words practically screaming off the screen. "Where the hell are you?" I stared at my father's text message for a moment, feeling the familiar surge of anxiety that his anger had always triggered in me. But this time, something was different. This time I felt the anxiety rise and then settle into something colder, more controlled. I was no longer the frightened daughter who cowered at his rage. Before I could respond to the text, my phone rang. His name flashed across the screen, and I knew he was too impatient to wait for a written reply. I answered on the third ring. "Where are you?" His voice exploded through the speaker, loud enough that Margaret looked up from across the room with raised eyebrows. "You left dinner without a proper goodbye, you ignored your mother's calls, and now you're not answering messages. What the hell is wrong with you?" I stepped out of Margaret's office into the hallway, keeping my voice measured. I had somewhere to be. Somewhere to be. Somewhere to be. He repeated the words as though they were the most absurd thing he had ever heard. "Family dinner is a tradition in this house. Your mother spent hours preparing that meal, and you just walked out like none of it mattered. Do you have any idea how disrespectful that is?" I almost laughed at the irony. He was lecturing me about respect while planning to humiliate me in front of an entire community, but I kept my composure, letting him continue his tirade. "This is exactly why we worry about you, Brooke. You have no sense of family loyalty. You have no understanding of what it means to be part of something bigger than yourself. Amber would never behave this way. Your mother is devastated. I hope you're proud of yourself." The manipulation was so transparent it was almost impressive. He was using guilt, shame, and comparison to Amber, all his favorite weapons, in a single breath. 20 years ago, this approach would have reduced me to tears and apologies. Tonight, it simply confirmed everything I already knew about him. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. The question caught him off guard. I could hear him sputtering on the other end of the line, unaccustomed to anything other than immediate submission. "Am I finished? Am I finished? I haven't even started. You are going to apologize to your mother. You are going to explain yourself. And you are going to promise that this kind of behavior will never happen again. Do you understand me?" "I understand you perfectly," I said. "I have always understood you, better than you realize." There was a pause. Something in my tone had shifted the energy of the conversation, and even my father, for all his bluster, could sense it. What is that supposed to mean? I let the silence stretch for a moment before responding. "Did the family enjoy the gift I left behind?" "What gift? What are you talking about?" "Check the living room. There's a box on the side table near the window. I left it before I departed this evening." I heard rustling on the other end of the line, footsteps moving across hardwood floors. My father was walking through the house, and I could hear my mother's voice in the background asking what was happening. Then I heard Amber, her tone sharp and curious. "There's a box here." My father said, his voice slightly muffled as he presumably examined it. "What is this?" "Open it." More rustling. The sound of paper tearing. And then silence. Complete, absolute silence. I waited, letting the moment unfold. I knew exactly what they were seeing. Inside that box was a large mixed media artwork, the same piece I had created when I was 17 years old, the same piece that had won first prize at my school's art exhibition, the same piece my father had torn apart and thrown in the garbage because he considered it worthless. What my family did not know was that Mrs. Chen had rescued the torn pieces that night. She had gathered them carefully and stored them in her own home, waiting for the day when I might want them back. I had discovered this 5 years ago during a private conversation with her, and I had spent considerable money having the artwork professionally restored by a specialist who dealt with damaged pieces. The restoration was perfect. Every brushstroke, every texture, every element of my teenage self's vision had been preserved. And on the back of the canvas, in my own handwriting from decades ago, was the dedication I had written before the exhibition for Grandma Rose, who always believed in me. My father's voice came through the phone, but it was different now. The rage had drained away, replaced by something I had rarely heard from him. Uncertainty. "Where did you get this?" "I never lost it," I said. "I kept it, all these years. I kept it because I remember what you did. I remember every word you said when you destroyed it. I remember the look on your face when you tore it apart. And I remember that Mom stood there and said nothing." In the background, I heard my mother's voice, thin and strained. "Richard, what is it? What's in the box?" Then Amber's voice, closer to the phone now. She must have moved to see what had silenced our father so completely, and then her scream, sharp, shocked, disbelieving. "Oh my God, what is this? How is this possible?" I could picture the scene perfectly. My father standing frozen with the artwork in his hands. My mother pale with recognition, remembering the night she had chosen silence over defending her daughter. Amber, staring in confusion, perhaps not even understanding the full significance of what she was seeing, but sensing that something fundamental had shifted. And somewhere in that house, I knew Mrs. Chen was watching. The woman who had quietly preserved evidence of my talent when my own father tried to erase it. The woman who had given me a look of sympathy and encouragement just hours ago. She understood what was happening, even if no one else did. "You thought you erased me," I said into the phone. "You thought you destroyed every trace of who I was and what I could become. But I remember everything. I have proof of everything. And I am not the weak, worthless daughter you convinced yourselves I was." My father finally found his voice, but it came out as barely a whisper. "Brooke, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is completely inappropriate. You can't just—" "I'm not finished," I interrupted. "That artwork is just a reminder that I see you. I see all of you. And I remember every single thing you have ever done to me." I ended the call without waiting for a response. Standing alone in the hallway outside Margaret's office, I felt something I had not experienced in a very long time. Power. Not the loud, aggressive power my father wielded, but something quieter and far more dangerous. The power of truth. The power of memory. The power of patience finally rewarded. My phone buzzed with a notification. I looked down at the screen and saw a message from the automated system Margaret had set up to track the mortgage acquisition. "Loan transfer complete. New owner Knight Strategies LLC." I stood in the quiet hallway reading the notification on my phone over and over again. The mortgage transfer was complete. My family's home, the house where I had experienced so much pain, where my father had ruled like a tyrant, and my mother had enabled his cruelty through silence, now belonged to my company. They had no idea. They were probably still standing in their living rooms staring at that restored artwork, trying to understand what it meant. What it meant was simple. I remembered everything, and I was just getting started. My phone rang again. My father's name flashed across the screen, and I watched it ring until it went to voicemail. A moment later it rang again, and again. Each time I let it go unanswered. For 42 years I had jumped whenever my father demanded my attention. I had apologized when I had done nothing wrong. I had made myself small to avoid his anger and sought his approval knowing it would never come. Those days were over. He could call 100 times and I would not answer. I was done responding to his summons like an obedient child. I thanked Margaret for her help and walked out into the cool night air, my mind turning over the events of the evening. The restored artwork had achieved exactly what I intended. It was not meant to destroy them, not yet. It was meant to unsettle them, to plant a seed of doubt, to make them wonder what else I knew and what else I might do. In strategic terms, it was a warning shot. A first knock on the door before the real visitor arrives. As I drove through the empty streets, I found myself thinking about the day my father destroyed the original piece. The memory was burned into my consciousness with perfect clarity, a wound that had never fully healed. I was 17 years old, filled with the kind of hope that only the young can sustain. My art portfolio sat on the kitchen table, carefully organized, and ready to be submitted for a prestigious scholarship. I had worked on those pieces for months, pouring my grief over my grandmother's death into images that tried to capture what she had meant to me. My father came home in a foul mood that evening. I never learned what had upset him. Perhaps something at work, perhaps just the general dissatisfaction that seemed to follow him everywhere. He walked into the kitchen, saw my portfolio, and his face twisted with contempt. "What is this garbage?" he demanded, picking up one of my pieces. "It's my art portfolio," I said, my voice small. For the scholarship application. He flipped through the pages, his expression growing darker with each image. This is what you've been wasting your time on. This is why your grades have been slipping. You think you're going to be some kind of artist. My grades haven't been slipping, I protested weakly. And Grandma always said I had talent. She believed in me. The mention of my grandmother only made things worse. My father's face reddened, and before I could react, he began tearing the portfolio apart. Page after page destroyed in seconds. Months of work hours of careful effort reduced to scraps of paper falling to the floor. Your grandmother filled your head with nonsense, he said as he destroyed my dreams. You have no talent. You have no future in art. The sooner you accept that, the better off you'll be. I won't have a daughter of mine embarrassing this family with delusions of grandeur. I stood, frozen tears streaming down my face, watching everything I had worked for disappear. And through it all, my mother stood in the doorway. She saw everything. She said nothing. When my father finished his destruction, he walked past my mother without a word, leaving me alone with the ruins of my portfolio scattered across the kitchen floor. My mother looked at me, and for a moment, I thought she might say something comforting, might acknowledge the cruelty she had just witnessed. Instead, she simply turned and followed my father out of the room. I sank to my knees and gathered the torn pieces, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. That was when Mrs. Chen appeared. She had been working in the house that day, and she must have heard everything from somewhere nearby. Without a word, she knelt beside me and began helping me collect the scattered fragments. Her hands were gentle and methodical, treating each piece as though it mattered. "Don't throw these away," she whispered when we had gathered everything. "Give them to me. I'll keep them safe." I looked at her through my tears, not understanding. "Why?" "Because someday you may want them back," she said. "Someday you may want to remember who you were before they tried to break you." I gave her the pieces, too devastated to think clearly about what she was offering. And then I pushed the memory away, burying it so deep that I did not think about it for years afterward. It was simply too painful to revisit. It was not until 5 years ago, when I returned to my hometown for a business matter, that I saw Mrs. Chen again. She was older, then retired from working for my parents, living in a small apartment on the other side of town. I visited her on impulse, drawn by some need I could not fully articulate. She recognized me immediately, and after we had talked for a while, she disappeared into her bedroom and returned with a carefully preserved box. Inside were the torn pieces of my portfolio, stored with the same care one might give to precious documents. "I told you I would keep them safe," she said simply. I wept when I saw them. And then I took them to the best art restoration specialist I could find, paying whatever it cost to have my work brought back to life. The centerpiece, the mixed media piece that had won first prize, was the most damaged, but also the most important. It took months to restore, but when it was finished, it looked almost exactly as it had the day I created it. I had kept the restored piece in storage ever since, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. Tonight had been that moment. My father had tried to erase evidence of my talent, to destroy proof that I had ever been capable of creating something beautiful. But Mrs. Chen had preserved the truth, and I had resurrected it. The restored artwork was a message: you cannot erase me. You cannot destroy what I am. I remember everything, and I have evidence. This was only the first knock. The real confrontation was still coming. I checked my phone and saw 7 missed calls from my father and 3 from my mother. I ignored them all. Then I turned my car toward a part of the city my family had never seen and pulled into the parking garage of a gleaming office building. The sign above the entrance read, "Night Strategies," in elegant silver letters. My company. My empire. The life I had built while they were busy dismissing me as a failure. I stepped out of my car and walked toward the building's entrance, the click of my heels echoing through the empty parking garage. It was nearly midnight, but the lights in the Night Strategies offices were still on. They always were. My company operated across multiple time zones, and there was always someone working on something critical. The security guard at the front desk stood as I approached, offering a respectful nod. "Good evening, Ms. Knight. Working late again?" "Always," I replied with a small smile. "Is anyone else still upstairs?" "Ms. Patricia is in her office, and a few of the analysts are finishing up the quarterly reports. Should I let them know you're here?" "No need. I'll find my way." I walked through the lobby past the large silver letters spelling out Knight Strategies on the wall and felt the familiar sense of pride that always accompanied entering this space. This building, this company, this empire, I had built it all from nothing. Every client we served, every contract we secured, every employee we hired represented years of sacrifice and strategic planning. When I stepped off the elevator on the executive floor, my assistant David was waiting with a tablet in his hand and a concerned expression on his face. David was in his early 30s, brilliant with numbers and utterly loyal. He had been with me for 6 years and knew more about my business operations than almost anyone else. "Ms. Knight, I wasn't expecting you tonight. Is everything all right?" "Everything is proceeding as planned," I said. "But I need an update on the mortgage acquisition and any additional information you've gathered." "Of course. I'll have everything ready in the conference room in 10 minutes. As David hurried off to prepare his report, I walked down the hallway toward my corner office. Along the way, several employees looked up from their workstations and offered greetings. "Good evening, Ms. Knight." "Nice to see you, Ms. Knight." "Let me know if you need anything, Ms. Knight." The respect in their voices was genuine. These people knew my capabilities. They had seen me navigate impossible situations, make difficult decisions under pressure, and build this company into something remarkable. To them, I was a leader worth following. The contrast with my family's perception could not have been more stark. To my parents, I was a disappointment. To my sister, I was a cautionary tale of failure. But here within these walls, I was exactly who I had always known I could be. I entered my office and set down my things, then walked to the window overlooking the city. The light stretched out below me like a glittering carpet, beautiful and full of possibility. I had stood at this window countless times over the years, but tonight, it felt different. Tonight, everything I had built was about to serve a purpose beyond profit margins and business growth. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Patricia Morrison stepped in, her silver hair perfectly styled, and her sharp eyes taking in my expression with immediate understanding. "I heard you were here," she said, closing the door behind her. "David mentioned you needed information urgently. What's happening?" Patricia was 63 years old and had been with Knight Strategies since nearly the beginning. Before joining me, she had spent 30 years in corporate finance, climbing the ladder in an era when women rarely reached executive positions. She had become my most trusted advisor, offering the kind of wisdom and guidance I had never received from my own mother. "Family matters," I said simply. "Things are escalating and I need to be prepared." Patricia nodded slowly. She knew the broad outlines of my family situation, though I had never shared the full extent of their cruelty. "Whatever you need, I'm here." We walked together to the conference room where David had already set up his presentation. The large screen displayed financial charts and documents all related to my parents' situation. I took my seat at the head of the table, and Patricia settled into the chair beside me. "Walk me through everything," I said. David began his presentation with characteristic precision. "The mortgage acquisition was completed at 11:47 this evening. Knight Strategies LLC now holds full ownership of the debt associated with your parents' property. The total outstanding balance, including principal accumulated interest and fees, is $473,000. He clicked to the next slide, which showed a timeline of refinancing activity. Over the past 12 years, the property has been refinanced 7 times. Each refinancing increased the debt while providing short-term liquidity that was spent on lifestyle expenses. Based on their current income and spending patterns, they have been unable to make full payments for the past 8 months. They've been paying interest only, and even that has been inconsistent." I studied the numbers carefully. The situation was even more precarious than I had realized. My parents had been living on borrowed time and borrowed money, maintaining their respectable facade while sinking deeper into financial quicksand. "What about their other assets?" I asked. "Minimal," David replied. "They have 2 vehicles, both leased. A small investment account that's been steadily depleted over the past 3 years, and some personal property of varying value. If the mortgage were to be called due immediately, they would have no means of paying it. Foreclosure would be their only option." Patricia spoke up, her voice thoughtful. "You now have significant leverage. The question is how you intend to use it." I considered her words carefully. This was the moment I had been building toward, but I needed to be clear about my own intentions. It would be easy to destroy my family financially. With a few signatures, I could initiate foreclosure proceedings and watch them lose everything. The temptation was real, especially after years of mistreatment. But that was not who I wanted to be. I had not built this company by being vindictive or cruel. I had built it through intelligence, patience, and strategic thinking. My revenge would follow the same principles. "I want them to understand consequences," I said finally. "I want them to know that their actions have real impact, that they cannot treat people with cruelty and expect no repercussions. But I am not interested in leaving them homeless or destitute. That's not justice, that's just destruction." Patricia nodded approvingly. "A measured approach. Use the leverage to create accountability without becoming the villain of your own story." "Exactly." David cleared his throat, his expression shifting to something more troubled. "Ma'am, there's something else you need to see. When we did the full analysis of the mortgage documents, we discovered some irregularities." He clicked to a new slide and I felt my attention sharpen. "Your parents' mortgage situation is far worse than we initially thought. There are several hidden documents that weren't part of the original file, and your sister's name appears on multiple loans we didn't know existed." I stared at the screen, processing what David had just revealed. Hidden documents, additional loans, Amber's name appearing in places it should not be. The financial picture of my family was even more complicated and corrupt than I had imagined. "Show me everything," I said. David clicked through several more slides, each one revealing another layer of deception. There were home equity loans taken out without proper disclosure, credit lines secured using inflated asset valuations, and most damning of all, income verification documents that bore little resemblance to reality. My father had apparently been overstating his earnings for years, using fabricated pay stubs and altered tax returns to qualify for loans he could never legitimately afford. "This goes beyond poor financial management," Patricia observed, her voice tight with professional disapproval. "This is systematic fraud. If the bank had conducted proper due diligence, they would have caught this years ago." "Why didn't they?" I asked. David shrugged slightly. "The housing market was booming when most of these loans were issued. Banks were approving everything with minimal scrutiny. By the time anyone might have looked more closely, the loans had been bundled and sold multiple times. Your parents got lucky or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. They got away with fraud, but they also trapped themselves in debt they can never repay." I sat back in my chair, letting the implications settle over me. My father, the man who had lectured me my entire life about responsibility and integrity, had built his comfortable existence on lies and financial manipulation. The house where he had torn apart my artwork and dismissed my dreams was not even truly his, it belonged to the banks he had deceived. The hypocrisy was staggering, but it also presented an opportunity. If this information ever became public, my father would face more than just financial ruin. He could potentially face criminal charges for mortgage fraud. His reputation in the community, the thing he valued above all else, would be destroyed. I had no intention of reporting him to authorities. That was not the kind of revenge I sought, but knowing this information gave me leverage I had not anticipated. It was one more card in my hand, one more pressure point I could apply if necessary. "What about my sister's involvement?" I asked. David pulled up another document. Amber co-signed a home equity loan 3 years ago. The funds were used to capitalize her real estate business. She also appears as a guarantor on a credit line that was opened 18 months ago. If your parents default on these obligations, Amber's credit and potentially her business assets could be affected. This was unexpected news. I had always assumed Amber was simply a beneficiary of our parents' favoritism, enjoying their support without bearing any of the risk. But if she had signed legal documents tying her to their debt, she was more complicit than I had realized. She had participated in the financial house of cards, even if she did not fully understand its fragility. "I need to see the complete file," I said. "Not the summary, the original documents. Everything the bank has." David nodded. "I can arrange for you to review them at the bank tomorrow morning. With the loan transfer complete, you have the legal right to access all documentation as the new creditor." The next morning, I sat in a private conference room at First Regional Bank, surrounded by boxes of documents that told the complete story of my parents' financial life. A bank officer named Thompson had been assigned to assist me, clearly nervous about having such an important client reviewing files in person. "Ms. Knight, if there's anything specific you're looking for, I'd be happy to help locate it," he offered. "Thank you, but I prefer to review everything myself. This is a significant acquisition for my company, and I want to understand exactly what we've purchased." Thompson nodded and retreated to a corner of the room, leaving me to work through the files at my own pace. What I found confirmed and expanded everything David had uncovered. The fraud was not a one-time occurrence, but a pattern that stretched back over a decade. My father had systematically misrepresented his finances to obtain credit. He did not deserve using the family home as collateral again and again until it was leveraged far beyond its actual value. There were also documents I had not expected: correspondence between my father and loan officers, some of which suggested that certain bank employees had been complicit in approving questionable applications. The corruption ran deeper than just my family. I photographed key documents and made detailed notes, building a comprehensive picture of the situation. By the time I finished, I understood exactly what I was dealing with. I called Margaret from the bank's parking lot. "The acquisition is solid," I told her. "But the underlying situation is worse than we anticipated. There's evidence of fraud throughout these files. My father has been deceiving lenders for years." Margaret was silent for a moment. "That gives you additional leverage, but it also creates complexity. If you ever needed to pursue foreclosure, a competent defense attorney might argue that the loans themselves were improperly issued." "I don't intend to pursue foreclosure unless absolutely necessary. What I need is for all the transfer documentation to be bulletproof. I want there to be no question that Knight Strategies LLC is the legitimate owner of this debt, with full rights to collect or modify the terms as we see fit." "That's already in place," Margaret assured me. "The transfer was conducted according to standard procedures. Your company owns the debt free and clear. Whatever happens next is entirely your decision." I ended the call and sat in my car thinking about what I had learned. My family had created this crisis through their own choices: the greed, the deception, the willingness to live beyond their means while looking down on everyone else. I had not manufactured their vulnerability. I had simply positioned myself to take advantage of it. This was not cruelty. This was accountability. For the first time in their lives, my parents would face consequences for their behavior. They would learn that their actions had real impact, that they could not build a life on lies and expect it to stand forever, and they would learn it from the daughter they had dismissed as worthless. My phone buzzed with a notification from the bank's automated system confirming what Margaret had already told me. "Transfer complete. All rights and obligations now belong to Knight Strategies LLC." The days following my visit to the bank passed in a blur of preparation. The Christmas party was less than a week away, and I intended to be ready for whatever my family had planned. But more importantly, I intended to be ready to respond in ways they could never anticipate. I sat in my home office surrounded by notes and timelines mapping out every possible scenario. My family expected me to arrive at the party vulnerable and unsuspecting, ready to be publicly humiliated in front of everyone they knew. They had no idea that I had overheard their plot, No idea that I now controlled their financial future, and no idea that the daughter they considered a failure had spent years building the resources to defend herself. The first element of my preparation involved documentation. I contacted a discreet security firm that specialized in corporate events and private protection. They provided services for executives who needed to navigate potentially hostile situations without drawing attention. I explained what I needed: a small team capable of recording video and audio throughout the evening, positioned to capture everything without being obvious about their presence. The team leader, a professional woman named Sandra, understood immediately. "You want evidence," she said during our planning meeting, "in case anyone tries to rewrite history afterward." "Exactly. My family has a pattern of denying things they've said and done. I want irrefutable documentation of whatever happens at this party." Sandra nodded. "We can position 2 operatives as catering staff and 1 as a guest. They'll have concealed recording equipment that captures high-quality audio and video. Everything will be time-stamped and stored securely. If you ever need to prove what happened, you'll have professional-grade evidence." This was not about public exposure or embarrassment. I had no intention of posting videos online or sharing them with newspapers. This was about protection, ensuring that when my family inevitably tried to twist the narrative and paint themselves as victims, I would have proof of what actually occurred. The second element of my preparation was more personal. I spent an entire afternoon at an upscale boutique working with a personal stylist to select the perfect outfit for the evening. The woman who helped me, an elegant professional in her 50s named Catherine, understood exactly what I was trying to achieve. "You want to look successful without being ostentatious," she observed as we reviewed options. "Powerful but not aggressive, the kind of woman who commands respect simply by entering a room." "Yes, I want my appearance to speak for itself. No explanations necessary." We settled on a deep burgundy dress in a classic cut made from fabric that whispered quality without shouting price. The color was striking but sophisticated, appropriate for a woman in her 40s who had nothing to prove but chose to present herself with dignity. Catherine paired it with understated jewelry, a simple gold necklace that had belonged to my grandmother, diamond studs that caught the light without demanding attention, and a watch that anyone in the business world would recognize as expensive. When I tried on the complete ensemble and looked at myself in the mirror, I saw someone my family had never met. Not the dismissed daughter, not the family disappointment, not the woman they expected to mock and belittle. I saw Brooke Knight, CEO, entrepreneur, self-made success. I saw someone who had risen above every obstacle they had placed in her path. For older women who have spent their lives being underestimated, there is something deeply satisfying about the moment when you finally get to show up as your true self. That was what this outfit represented: not vanity, but vindication. The third element of my preparation involved logistics and contingencies. I met with Margaret to review all the documents we might need during the confrontation. She had organized everything into a secure briefcase: the mortgage transfer papers, the evidence of financial fraud, copies of the falsified income documents, and something else she had discovered during her research. "I found discrepancies in your mother's original will." Margaret told me, her expression serious. "The version currently on file differs from an earlier draft that was registered with a different attorney 15 years ago. It appears someone altered the beneficiary designations after your mother drafted the original." This was disturbing news, though not entirely surprising. "My father..." "Most likely. The changes removed you as a primary beneficiary and redirected your share to your sister. The alterations were made approximately 6 months after your grandmother passed away." I absorbed this information, adding it to the growing catalog of betrayals. My father had not only tried to erase my achievements, he had attempted to erase my inheritance as well. He had systematically worked to ensure I received nothing, even from a mother who might have wanted to provide for me. "Keep all of this ready," I instructed Margaret. "I may not need to use any of it, but I want options available." I also arranged for personal security on the night of the party. A professional bodyguard would accompany me, remaining discreet but visible enough to discourage any physical confrontation. This was not because I expected violence. My family's weapons were emotional, not physical, but because having protection sent a message. It said that I was someone worth protecting, someone who took her own safety seriously, someone who was not arriving at this party as a vulnerable target. Finally, I mapped out my exit strategy. I identified multiple ways to leave the venue quickly if things escalated beyond my control. I arranged for a car to be waiting nearby, ready to depart at a moment's notice. And I established check-in protocols with Patricia at the office, ensuring that someone would know immediately if anything went wrong. By the time I finished my preparations, I felt ready. Not eager, I took no pleasure in the confrontation that was coming, but ready. Whatever my family threw at me, I would be prepared to respond. Whatever lies they told, I would have evidence of the truth. Whatever power plays they attempted, I would have leverage they could not imagine. The Christmas party would be their stage designed for my humiliation. But I intended to rewrite the script entirely. I was reviewing my notes one final time when my laptop chimed with an incoming video call. The name on the screen surprised me, Aunt Maggie, my mother's sister. We had not spoken in years, not since a tense family gathering where she had tried to defend me and been shouted down by my father. I accepted the call, and Maggie's face appeared on screen. She looked older than I remembered, her hair now completely gray, but her eyes held the same sharp intelligence I recalled from my childhood. "Brooke," she said, her voice urgent. "Thank God you answered. We need to talk. It's urgent." "Aunt Maggie, what's wrong?" She leaned closer to the camera, lowering her voice as though afraid of being overheard. "There's something about your mother you need to know. Something I should have told you years ago." I leaned toward my laptop screen, my heart beating faster as I studied Aunt Maggie's face. She looked worried in a way I had never seen before, her usual composed demeanor replaced by something more urgent and vulnerable. "What do you mean?" I asked. "What truth?" Maggie glanced over her shoulder as though checking that she was alone before turning back to the camera. "Not over video. This needs to be in person. Can you meet me tomorrow? There are things I need to show you, things I've been holding on to for years." "Of course. Where?" She gave me the address of a small cafe about an hour outside the city, a place she said was far enough from our hometown that we would not risk running into anyone who knew our family. We agreed to meet at 10 in the morning, and before ending the call, Maggie said something that stayed with me through the sleepless night that followed. "Brooke, I want you to know that I've been watching over you. From a distance, but always watching. Your mother asked me to a long time ago. She knew things might get difficult for you, and she wanted someone in her corner even if she couldn't be there herself." The next morning, I drove to the cafe through gray December skies, my mind churning with questions. Aunt Maggie had always been a peripheral figure in my life, present at family gatherings, but never central, kind to me, but never close. I had assumed she simply preferred to stay out of family drama. Now I was beginning to understand that her distance might have been strategic. The cafe was small and quiet, with only a handful of customers scattered among the wooden tables. Maggie was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of tea and a worn leather satchel beside her. She stood when she saw me, and pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than any embrace I could remember receiving from my own mother. "Thank you for coming," she said as we settled into our seats. "I know this is all very mysterious, but I needed to be careful. Your father has eyes and ears everywhere in that town, and what I'm about to tell you could put us both at risk if he found out." "Tell me everything," I said. Maggie took a deep breath and began. "Your mother and I were very close growing up. She was the gentle one, the peacemaker, always trying to make everyone happy. When she married your father, I had concerns from the beginning. He was charming when he wanted to be, but there was a controlling streak in him that worried me." She paused, her eyes distant with memory. "Over the years, I watched that controlling behavior get worse. He isolated your mother from her friends, convinced her that she wasn't capable of handling finances, made all the decisions without consulting her. She wasn't allowed to have her own bank account. Did you know that? Every penny she spent had to be approved by him. I shook my head slowly. I had sensed my mother's powerlessness growing up, but I had never understood the full extent of her confinement. Your mother suffered in silence because she believed that was what good wives did, Maggie continued. She came from a generation that taught women to endure, to sacrifice, to put their families first, no matter the personal cost. But she saw what was happening to you, Brooke. She saw how your father treated you, how he favored Amber, how he tried to crush your spirit. And it broke her heart. Then why didn't she do anything? The question came out sharper than I intended, carrying decades of pain and confusion. Maggie reached across the table and took my hand. She tried in her own way. She couldn't stand up to your father directly, she didn't have the strength or the resources. But she did what she could behind the scenes. She asked me to watch over you, to be ready to help if you ever needed it. And she left something for you. From her satchel, Maggie withdrew a sealed envelope yellowed with age. My mother's handwriting was on the front, spelling out my name in the careful script I remembered from birthday cards and school permission slips. Your mother gave this to me about 10 years ago, Maggie explained. She told me to keep it safe and to give it to you when you were ready. She said you would know when the time was right. I stared at the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. Why now? Why did you decide I was ready now? Because of what I've been hearing from the family, Maggie said. I know about the Christmas party. I know what they're planning to do to you. And I know you've been preparing to fight back. If there was ever a time when you needed the truth, it's now. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. There's something else you need to know. Your father tried to alter your mother's will after she passed. The original document left equal shares to both you and Amber, with some specific items designated for you alone, including your grandmother's jewelry and some family property. But the version that went through probate was different. Your share was reduced to almost nothing. I suspected as much, I said quietly. My lawyer found discrepancies. Maggie nodded. Don't trust any documents kept in that house. Your father has had years to manipulate records, destroy evidence, and rewrite history to suit his narrative. The only things you can trust are what your mother managed to hide from him. She gestured toward the envelope in my hands. That's why this matters. Whatever is in there, it's something your mother wanted you to have, something she kept secret from your father. She told me once, if anything happens to me, Brooke will need the truth. I think this envelope contains that truth. I turned the envelope over, examining the seal. It had never been opened. Whatever secrets my mother had hidden inside had remained undisturbed for a decade, waiting for this moment. There's something else, Maggie added. When your mother gave me this envelope, she mentioned something I've never fully understood. She said there was someone else you should know about, someone connected to your father. She said you would learn more when the time was right, but she never explained what she meant. A chill ran down my spine. Someone else. What could that possibly mean? I thanked Maggie for everything she had shared, for the years of silent watching, for keeping my mother's trust. We embraced again before parting, and she made me promise to be careful at the Christmas party. Back in my car, I sat in the parking lot with the envelope in my lap, gathering the courage to open it. Whatever was inside had been important enough for my mother to hide, important enough for her to entrust to her sister, with instructions for my protection. Finally, I broke the seal and withdrew the contents. Inside were documents, official-looking papers, photographs, and a handwritten letter. As I began to read, my blood ran cold. These were records of my father's involvement in a financial scandal from decades ago. Evidence of embezzlement from a community organization. Proof that he had stolen money meant for charity and used it to fund his lifestyle. If this information became public, it would destroy him completely. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, reading and rereading the documents my mother had hidden away. The evidence was damning, and comprehensive bank statements showing irregular transfers meeting minutes from the community organization where funds went missing, and most crucially, a signed memo in my father's handwriting authorizing payments to a personal account that should never have received charitable funds. The embezzlement had occurred over 20 years ago when I was still a teenager. My father had served as treasurer of a local charitable foundation that raised money for underprivileged children in our community. According to these documents, he had systematically diverted funds over a 3-year period, skimming amounts small enough to avoid immediate detection, but large enough to significantly supplement his income. The total stolen exceeded $50,000 money that should have gone to scholarships, school supplies, and summer programs for kids who had nothing. My mother had discovered this. The handwritten letter included with the documents explained everything in her careful, measured prose. She had stumbled upon discrepancies while helping organize paperwork for a charity event. When she confronted my father privately, he had threatened her not with physical violence, but with something equally devastating. He told her that if she ever revealed what she knew, he would divorce her, take the children, and ensure she never saw us again. In that era, in that community, a woman with no independent income and no family support would have had little recourse against such threats. So my mother had done the only thing she could. She gathered the evidence, quietly made copies, and entrusted them to her sister with instructions to keep them safe. She never intended to use the documents to destroy my father. She kept them as insurance protection in case he ever tried to abandon her or harm her children in ways she could not prevent. Reading her letter, I finally understood something that had confused me my entire life. My mother had not been weak. She had not been complicit in my mistreatment because she did not care. She had been trapped in a marriage with a man who controlled every aspect of her existence, and she had done what she could to protect herself and her daughters within those constraints. The silence I had interpreted as indifference was actually strategic survival. Tears blurred my vision as I processed this revelation. All those years I had resented my mother for never defending me. I had believed she simply did not love me enough to stand up to my father. But she had been fighting her own battle, one I never knew about, using the only weapons available to her. I wiped my eyes and forced myself to think clearly. The question now was what to do with this information. If I exposed my father's embezzlement, his reputation in our community would be destroyed. He had spent decades cultivating an image as a respectable businessman, a pillar of the community, a man of integrity. The revelation that he had stolen from children's charities would annihilate everything he had built. People who had respected him would turn away in disgust. Friends would become strangers. The social standing he valued above all else would crumble to nothing. Part of me wanted exactly that. After everything he had done to me, the cruelty, the dismissal, the systematic destruction of my confidence and self-worth, he deserved to face consequences. He deserved to know what it felt like to be humiliated, to have everything he valued stripped away. But another part of me hesitated. Using this information felt like crossing a line I was not sure I wanted to cross. It would not just affect my father. It would affect my mother's memory, my sister, everyone connected to our family. And it would make me the aggressor, the one who struck the first devastating blow. I thought about what my grandmother had taught me. Quiet wealth, letting actions speak rather than words, building strength in silence, and using it only when necessary. This evidence was a weapon of last resort. I would not deploy it preemptively. But if my family continued their attacks, if they proceeded with their plan to humiliate me publicly, then I would respond with everything I had. I drove home and spent the next several hours making copies of every document. I scanned each page into secure digital files, backed them up to multiple locations, and prepared a package to send to Margaret. She would know how to store them safely and how to use them if the time ever came. As I organized the materials, I noticed something I had overlooked during my initial reading. Among the bank statements were records of regular payments to a woman whose name I did not recognize, someone called Eleanor Vance. The payments were modest but consistent, occurring monthly for nearly 7 years before abruptly stopping. There was no explanation in my mother's letter for who this woman was, or why my father had been sending her money. Another mystery, another thread to pull. I made a note to investigate Eleanor Vance later, but for now my priority was the Christmas party. The event was only 3 days away, and I needed to stay focused on the confrontation that was coming. I had just finished sealing the document package for Margaret when my phone rang. It was Margaret herself, and something in the urgency of the ringtone made my stomach tighten. "Brooke," she said before I could even greet her. "We have a problem. Your family just made a move." "What kind of move?" "They posted something online, on Facebook, on a community page that covers your hometown. It's generating significant engagement already." My jaw clenched. What did they post? Margaret's voice was carefully controlled the way it always was when she was delivering bad news. "It's a series of comments and a longer post from your father's account. They're painting you as mentally unstable, claiming you've been harassing the family, suggesting that you have a history of erratic behavior. Your sister added comments implying that you've been financially irresponsible and have repeatedly asked them for money." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of their cruelty pressing down on me. Even now, even after everything I had built, they were trying to destroy me through reputation assassination. "There's more," Margaret continued. "The post hints that something dramatic will happen at the Christmas party. They're priming the community to see you as the villain before you even arrive. Whatever they're planning for that night, they want everyone predisposed to believe their version of events." I opened my eyes and looked at the envelope of evidence sitting on my desk. My mother's insurance policy, my weapon of last resort. They had just escalated the war, and they had no idea what I was holding. I asked Margaret to read me the exact wording of the posts, and as she spoke, I felt the familiar sting of my family's cruelty cutting through my composure. They had crafted their attack carefully using language that was vague enough to avoid outright libel, but specific enough that everyone in our community would know exactly who they were talking about. My father's post read, "It's sad when some family members think they're too good for the people who raised them. Some people believe success means turning your back on everyone who supported you. Real family sticks together. Real family doesn't abandon traditions or spread lies to make themselves feel important." The comments underneath were worse. Amber had written, "Some people have never accomplished anything real in their lives, but want everyone to believe they're successful. Luck and deception can only take you so far. Eventually the truth comes out." She had added a second comment. "It's painful watching someone you grew up with become so bitter and jealous. We've tried to help, but some people refuse to accept that they're the problem." My mother had contributed a brief but damaging addition. "We've done everything we can for all our children. Some people just can't be helped, no matter how much you sacrifice for them." Reading these words felt like being stabbed with familiar knives. Every accusation was a twisted mirror image of reality. They were the ones who had abandoned family loyalty, who had spread lies, who had refused to acknowledge accomplishment. But to anyone reading these posts without context, I would appear to be the troubled, ungrateful daughter causing problems for a loving family. Within hours, the small-town gossip network had activated. My phone buzzed continuously with messages from people I had not spoken to in years. Some were genuinely concerned, asking if I was okay and what was happening. Others were clearly fishing for information, eager to be the first to spread whatever new drama they could uncover. A few sent screenshots of the posts along with barely concealed judgment, their messages framed as supportive but carrying undertones of suspicion. One message particularly stung. A woman I had known since elementary school, someone who had attended my art exhibition all those years ago, wrote, "Brooke, I just saw what your family posted. I hope everything is okay. I always thought you were so talented, but I guess family situations can be complicated. Let me know if you want to talk." The pity in her words was almost worse than outright condemnation. She had already decided that where there was smoke, there must be fire. My family's narrative was taking hold. For women who have lived in small communities who understand how reputation functions as social currency, this kind of attack is devastatingly effective. It does not matter if the accusations are true. What matters is that they are public, that they are repeated, that they create doubt in the minds of people who once respected you. My family knew exactly what they were doing. They were poisoning the well before I even arrived at the Christmas party. I called Margaret back after reading through all the messages. "I want to discuss our options," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the anger churning inside me. "Legally, we could pursue a defamation claim," Margaret replied. "The posts are carefully worded, but the implication is clear and we can demonstrate damages to your reputation. A cease and desist letter might be enough to force them to remove the content." "No." There was a pause on the line. "No. Filing a lawsuit would make me look defensive. It would suggest that their accusations have enough merit to require legal intervention. And it would shift the battlefield to courtrooms and depositions which could drag on for months or years." "Then what do you want to do?" I looked out my window at the city lights, thinking about strategy. My family had chosen their arena public opinion in our hometown community. They had chosen their timing right before the Christmas party when everyone would be gathered and gossiping. They believed they were setting the stage for my humiliation. But they had made a critical error. They thought I would respond emotionally, defensively, predictably. They expected me to fire back with angry posts of my own to deny their accusations in ways that would make me look guilty to give them ammunition for further attacks. Instead, I would give them nothing. I would let them believe their strategy was working. I would let them grow confident in their victory. And then at the Christmas party on the stage they had built for my destruction, I would turn everything around. "I want to defeat them on their own battlefield," I told Margaret. "They designed the Christmas party as my moment of humiliation. I intend to make it my moment of triumph. Everything we've prepared, the documentation, the evidence, the financial leverage, I want it ready to deploy at the party itself." "That's a high-risk approach," Margaret cautioned. "You'll be confronting them in front of witnesses with no opportunity to control the narrative afterward." "The witnesses are exactly what I need. My family has spent years rewriting history, denying things they've said and done, manipulating everyone's perception of reality. This time, everything will happen in public. There will be no room for denial." Margaret was silent for a moment, then said, "I understand. I'll have everything ready. Just promise me you'll stay safe." I assured her I would and ended the call. The next 2 days would require patience and discipline. I would not respond to the social media posts. I would not engage with the gossip. I would let my family believe they were winning while I prepared my response in silence. That evening, as I was finalizing my preparations, my phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number. It was a video file sent without any accompanying message. For a moment, I hesitated. Opening unknown files was never wise, but something told me this was important. I downloaded the video and pressed play. The footage was grainy, clearly recorded on a phone that was partially concealed. But the voices were unmistakable. My father and Amber sitting in what looked like our family's living room discussing their plans. "The mock award is ready," Amber was saying. "When we call her up on stage, everyone will think it's a real recognition. Then we reveal what it actually says and she'll be humiliated in front of the entire town." My father laughed coldly. "That's just the beginning. I've prepared a speech about family disappointments. By the time we're done, no one will ever take her seriously again." The video continued for several more minutes, revealing details of their scheme that were even more vicious than I had imagined. But what caught my attention most was a brief moment near the end when the camera angle shifted slightly and I caught a glimpse of the person holding the phone. It was Mrs. Chen. I watched the video 3 more times, studying every detail, listening to every word. The footage was shaky and partially obscured, but the content was unmistakable. My family had not only planned to humiliate me, they had discussed it with casual cruelty, laughing about my anticipated pain as though it were entertainment. The video showed my father and Amber in the living room, joined by one of Amber's friends, whose face I vaguely recognized from past family events. They were drinking wine and finalizing their plans with the enthusiasm of people organizing a surprise party, except the surprise they were planning was designed to destroy me. Amber's voice was clear despite the poor audio quality. We'll humiliate her in front of everyone. That's what she deserves for thinking she's better than us. She walks around like she's so superior, like she's achieved something special, when really she's just a failure who got lucky a few times." Her friend laughed appreciatively, and Amber continued with growing animation. "The mock award is perfect. It looks completely legitimate until you read what it actually says. Most likely to disappoint. Can you imagine her face when she realizes?" But then something shifted in Amber's tone. Her laughter faded, and she glanced toward the doorway as though checking whether anyone was listening. "Dad won't let me back down anyway. You know how he is when he decides something. Once he has a plan, everyone has to follow it, no questions asked. I tried to suggest we just ignore her this year, but he was furious." Her friend looked uncomfortable. "Is it really worth all this drama?" Amber shrugged, but the gesture seemed weary rather than dismissive. "It doesn't matter what I think. Dad wants her put in her place, and what Dad wants, Dad gets. That's how it's always been." This moment stopped me cold. For years I had viewed Amber as my primary antagonist within the family, the favored daughter who delighted in my suffering, who actively participated in every cruelty directed my way. And she was cruel, there was no denying that. Her words in this video proved she took genuine pleasure in the prospect of my humiliation. But she was also trapped. She was following orders from a father who demanded absolute obedience, participating in schemes she might not have designed herself because the alternative was facing his wrath. In her own way, Amber was as much a prisoner of his control as I had been. This did not excuse her behavior. She was an adult who could make her own choices, and she had chosen cruelty over conscience time and again. But it added a layer of complexity to my understanding of her character. She was not simply evil, she was damaged, shaped by the same toxic family dynamics that had wounded me, just in different ways. The video continued with my father entering the frame, his presence immediately dominating the room. Amber and her friend fell silent as he began speaking, and I recognized the familiar pattern, everyone deferring to him, everyone adjusting their behavior to accommodate his moods. "Brooke will learn her place," he declared, settling into his chair with the confidence of a man who had never been seriously challenged. "She always thinks she's above this family. She disappears for years, never calls, never visits, and then shows up expecting us to treat her like some kind of success story. It's time to remind everyone who she really is, a disappointment who abandoned the people who raised her." His words dripped with venom, but I heard something else beneath the surface. Fear. My father was afraid of me, or more precisely afraid of what I represented. I had escaped his control. I had built a life independent of his approval. My very existence was a challenge to the authority he had wielded over everyone else in the family for decades. That was why he needed to destroy me. Not because I had done anything to harm him, but because my independence threatened his sense of power. If I could succeed without his blessing, what did that say about his importance? If I could thrive after rejecting everything he represented, what did that reveal about the value of his approval? He continued outlining the plan in detail, the timing of the mock award, the key phrases he would include in his speech, the way they would position me on stage to maximize the impact of the humiliation. Every element had been calculated for maximum cruelty. This was not a spontaneous act of family dysfunction. It was a carefully orchestrated attack. When the video ended, I sat in silence processing everything I had seen. Then I noticed a text message that had arrived along with the video file. It was from the same unknown number, and it contained only a few lines. "Miss Brooke, your grandmother asked me to watch over you before she passed. She knew things would be difficult for you. I have kept my promise all these years. Now it is time you knew what they are planning. Be careful, but be strong. You are more powerful than they know. Mrs. Chen." Tears welled in my eyes as I read the message again. Mrs. Chen, the quiet housekeeper who had witnessed everything, who had gathered my destroyed artwork all those years ago, who had given me that look of sympathy at the family dinner. She had been my grandmother's agent, watching over me in silence, waiting for the moment when I would need her help. All those years I had felt completely alone in that house. I had believed no one saw my pain, no one cared about my suffering. But Mrs. Chen had seen. Mrs. Chen had cared. And she had kept her promise to my grandmother, protecting me in ways I never knew about until now. I typed a response to her message. "Thank you for everything. I will make grandmother proud." Then I called David, my assistant at Night Strategies. "I need you to arrange something for the Christmas party," I said, my voice steady with new resolve. "I want presentation equipment, a projector, and screen that can be set up quickly and discreetly. I also need you to coordinate with the security team. There's going to be a change in how I arrive." What kind of change? I thought about everything I had learned, everything I had prepared, everything that was about to unfold. My family had designed the Christmas party as my moment of destruction. They had no idea they were building the stage for their own exposure. "Prepare everything we discussed," I said, "and arrange my entrance. It's time to change the script." The evening of the Christmas party arrived with a cold clarity that matched my state of mind. I spent the afternoon in final preparations, reviewing every element of my plan with the precision I brought to business negotiations. By the time I stepped into my car, I was as ready as I would ever be. The party was being held at the Whitmore Community Center, a building my father had helped fund years ago, and that bore a plaque with his name near the entrance. The irony was not lost on me. He had built his reputation on charitable contributions made possible by stolen money, and now that same reputation was about to crumble in front of everyone who had admired him. I arrived deliberately late, timing my entrance for maximum impact. From my car in the parking lot, I could see the building glowing with warmth, its windows revealing a crowd of well-dressed guests mingling inside. Twinkling lights adorned every surface, and through the glass I could make out an enormous Christmas tree decorated with what looked like hundreds of ornaments. The scene was beautiful, a perfect facade of holiday cheer hiding the ugliness that lurked beneath. I watched for a few minutes, observing the dynamics through the windows. My parents stood near the main entrance, greeting guests with practiced warmth and gracious smiles. My father shook hands firmly and clapped acquaintances on the shoulder. My mother offered polite kisses on cheeks and compliments on dresses. They looked like the ideal hosts, the perfect couple pillars of their community, celebrating the season with friends and neighbors. But I knew what they really were, and soon everyone else would know too. The crowd inside represented the full spectrum of small-town society. Local business owners chatted with retired teachers. The mayor's wife compared jewelry with the head of the garden club. Young professionals home for the holidays reconnected with childhood friends, while their parents discussed grandchildren and retirement plans. This was the world my family had cultivated for decades, a network of relationships built on carefully maintained appearances. I could see the whispers already circulating through the room. Small clusters of people leaning toward each other, glancing toward my parents, clearly discussing the social media drama that had unfolded over the past few days. Some looked sympathetic toward my family. Others seemed skeptical, curious to see how the evening would unfold. Everyone was watching, waiting, anticipating something dramatic. Amber moved through the crowd in a stunning red dress that demanded attention. She smiled and laughed, with guests playing the role of the charming daughter perfectly. But I noticed how her eyes kept drifting toward the entrance, scanning every new arrival with barely concealed anxiety. She was waiting for me, expecting to see her defeated sister walk through those doors, ready to be humiliated. She had no idea what was actually coming. My father had positioned himself near the stage where the evening's program would take place. His posture radiated confidence and authority. Shoulders back, chin raised, the stance of a man who believed he was about to deliver a decisive victory. He held a glass of whiskey in one hand and a folded paper in the other, undoubtedly the speech he had prepared for my public humiliation. My mother stood apart from the festivities near a corner where she could observe without being the center of attention. She looked tired, I realized, studying her through the window. Tired and somehow smaller than I remembered. She clutched her drink with both hands and rarely engaged with passing guests, offering only brief smiles before returning to her watchful silence. As I continued my observation, I saw Aunt Maggie arrive. She entered through the main doors and immediately positioned herself near the family, though she maintained a careful distance. Her expression was alert and concerned, her eyes tracking my father's movements with obvious wariness. She knew something was coming, even if she did not know exactly what. At one point, Aunt Maggie caught my mother's eye across the room. Something passed between the sisters, a look I could not fully interpret from this distance, but which seemed loaded with history and unspoken understanding. My mother quickly looked away, and Aunt Maggie's face tightened with what might have been disappointment or resignation. Moving through the crowd with professional discretion, Mrs. Chen served drinks and collected empty glasses. She wore the uniform of the catering staff, blending seamlessly into the background in a way that made her nearly invisible to the wealthy guests. But I noticed that her attention was not on her work. Her eyes kept returning to the entrance, waiting, watching. She knew I was coming. She had given me the tools to fight back, and now she was waiting to see if I would use them. The security team I had hired was already in position, disguised as additional catering staff and a guest who blended perfectly with the crowd. Their recording equipment was concealed but active, capturing everything that would unfold tonight. Whatever happened there would be no dispute about the truth afterward. I checked my phone one final time. A message from David confirmed that the presentation equipment was in place, disguised as part of the evening's planned program. A message from Margaret confirmed she was standing by with all necessary documents. Everything was ready. I stepped out of my car and walked toward the entrance, my heels clicking against the pavement with a rhythm that felt like a countdown. The burgundy dress Catherine had helped me select moved perfectly with each step, sophisticated and powerful, without being ostentatious. My grandmother's gold necklace rested against my collarbone, a reminder of the woman who had believed in me when no one else did. 2 of my security personnel flanked me at a discreet distance as I approached the doors. I paused for just a moment, taking a breath, centering myself for what was about to unfold. Then I pushed open the main doors and stepped inside. The effect was immediate. Conversations stuttered and stopped, heads turned, eyes widened. The background music suddenly seemed too loud in the growing silence as one person after another noticed my arrival and paused to stare. I stood in the doorway, letting them look, letting them see me clearly for the first time in years. Not the struggling failure they had imagined, not the troubled daughter their social media posts had described, but a woman of unmistakable presence and power, radiating the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly who she is and what she is capable of. The entire room fell silent, and I felt every eye upon me as I began to walk forward. I walked into the room as though I owned it. Every step was measured and deliberate, my heels clicking against the polished floor with a rhythm that drew attention without demanding it. I kept my chin level, my shoulders back, my expression calm and composed. The burgundy dress moved with elegant precision, catching the light from the chandeliers in ways that highlighted its quality without announcing its price. Everything about my appearance had been calculated to communicate one simple message: I belonged here, and I was not afraid. The whispers began almost immediately. I could hear fragments of confused conversations as I passed through the crowd. Is that Brooke? She looks so different. I thought she was struggling. Where did she get that dress? The narrative my family had constructed over decades was cracking in real time, challenged by the simple reality of my presence. I made eye contact with no one, yet I was aware of everyone. The local business owner who had laughed at my father's jokes about his disappointing daughter. The retired teacher who had sent me a pitying message after reading the social media posts. The mayor's wife who had always looked through me as though I were invisible. They were all watching now, their certainty about who I was visibly wavering. Amber saw me from across the room, and I watched the transformation cross her face. Her confident smile froze, then faltered, then collapsed into something approaching alarm. She had dressed to dominate this party, her red dress designed to ensure she remained the center of attention. But my entrance had shifted the room's focus entirely, and she knew it. She began moving toward me, But before she could close the distance, my father intercepted. He approached with the aggressive posture of a man defending his territory, positioning himself directly in my path. "Brooke," he said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by nearby guests. "At least you cleaned up for once. I was worried you might show up looking like you usually do." The insult was designed to diminish me, to remind everyone present that I was the family disappointment, the daughter who could never quite measure up. In the past, such comments would have wounded me. I would have flushed with embarrassment, stammered a defensive response, or retreated into silence. That was what he expected, what everyone expected. Instead, I simply looked at him. I held his gaze for a long moment, my expression neutral, my body language completely relaxed. I did not respond to his words. I did not rise to his bait. I simply acknowledged his existence with the same mild interest one might show a stranger on the street, then continued walking. The non-reaction devastated him more effectively than any clever comeback could have. I saw his face redden, saw his jaw tighten, saw the flash of uncertainty in his eyes. For decades, his power over me had depended on my emotional responses, my fear, my hurt, my desperate need for his approval. By denying him that reaction, I had stolen his weapon. As I moved deeper into the room, guests began to notice the two well-dressed individuals who maintained a careful distance behind me. They were my security detail, and though they were discreet, anyone paying attention could tell they were professionals. In this community, personal security meant wealth and importance. It meant someone worth protecting. The sight of these escorts fundamentally challenged every assumption the room had made about my circumstances. I saw recognition dawn on faces throughout the crowd. The whispers took on a different quality, less dismissive, more curious, tinged with the beginning of respect. Who was this woman they had dismissed for so long? What had she become while they were not paying attention? My mother stood frozen near her corner, watching my progress through the room with an expression I could not quite read. There was surprise there, certainly, and perhaps something like fear. But beneath those obvious emotions, I thought I detected something else, something that might have been relief. I did not approach her. That conversation would come later if it came at all. Instead, I made my way toward Aunt Maggie, who was watching my entrance with barely concealed pride. When I reached her, I embraced her warmly, deliberately, ensuring that everyone in the room could see me choosing connection with one family member while pointedly ignoring the others. "You look magnificent," Maggie whispered in my ear. "Your grandmother would be so proud." "Thank you for everything," I whispered back. "Stay close. Things are about to get interesting." When I released Maggie from the embrace, I positioned myself where I could see the entire room. Amber had retreated to stand near our father, the two of them conferring in urgent whispers. Their original plan had clearly not accounted for me arriving like this confident, powerful, unmistakably someone of consequence. But I knew they would not abandon their scheme entirely. My father was too invested in my public humiliation to let unexpected circumstances derail him. He would adapt, perhaps tone down certain elements, but he would still proceed. His need to assert dominance over me was too fundamental to his identity to be easily abandoned. The party continued around us, but the atmosphere had changed. Conversations were more muted glances, more frequent tension, more palpable. Everyone sensed that something significant was unfolding, even if they did not understand exactly what. Mrs. Chen passed by with a tray of champagne glasses, and our eyes met briefly. She gave me the smallest nod, her expression conveying support and encouragement. I selected a glass from her tray and allowed myself a small sip, projecting the image of someone perfectly at ease despite the circumstances. About 20 minutes after my arrival, my father made his way to the small stage at the front of the room. He tapped the microphone to test it, sending a squeal of feedback through the speakers that made everyone wince. "Good evening, everyone," he announced, his voice filling the room. "Thank you all for joining us for our annual Christmas celebration. As many of you know, this party is a tradition our family holds dear, a time to gather with friends and neighbors and reflect on what matters most." He paused, his eyes finding me in the crowd. The look he gave me was cold and determined, the expression of a man who had come too far to turn back now. "Tonight we have a special presentation planned," he continued. "Something to recognize family members who have made particularly memorable contributions to our lives over the years." I felt the room's attention shift toward me. Everyone knew what was coming, or thought they did. They expected to witness my humiliation just as my father had planned. What they did not know was that I had plans of my own. My father cleared his throat and launched into his prepared remarks with the practiced ease of a man who had spent decades commanding rooms. He had always been charming when he wanted to be capable of projecting warmth and authority in equal measure. Tonight, he wielded that charm like a weapon. "Family is everything," he began, his voice rich with false sentiment. "And tonight I want to share some memories about our family, particularly about my eldest daughter, Brooke, who has joined us this evening." He gestured toward me, and I felt the room's attention intensify. Guests turned to look at me, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. They had heard the rumors, seen the social media posts, and now they were about to witness whatever spectacle my father had orchestrated. "Brooke has always been unique," my father continued, letting the word hang in the air with implications that needed no explanation. "From the time she was young, she marched to her own drummer. Sometimes that led her in interesting directions. Other times, well..." He chuckled, and scattered uncomfortable laughter rippled through the crowd. "I remember when she decided she was going to be an artist. She was convinced she had talent, absolutely certain she was destined for greatness. We tried to guide her toward more practical pursuits, but Brooke has always struggled with accepting good advice." The lies flowed smoothly, each one carefully constructed to paint me as delusional and unstable. He spoke of career attempts that never quite worked out, relationships that ended mysteriously, and years when the family lost touch with her because she refused to return our calls. Every story was a twisted version of reality designed to make me look like the troubled daughter they had always claimed I was. Through it all, my father said, his voice taking on a tone of wounded generosity, "Our family has been there for her. We've offered support, guidance, financial assistance when times were tough. Because that's what family does. We take care of each other even when it's difficult." The audience murmured sympathetically. I could see them buying into the narrative, nodding along with his version of events. In their minds, I was being transformed from an unknown quantity into a confirmed disappointment, a burden my family had nobly shouldered for decades. I stood perfectly still throughout his speech, my expression neutral, my body language relaxed. I gave him nothing to react to, no indication that his words were landing. This unsettled him visibly. He had expected tears, defensive outbursts, perhaps even an angry exit. My calm presence was not part of his script. When he finished his portion of the presentation, he called Amber to the stage. She ascended the steps with practiced grace, her red dress catching the light as she positioned herself beside our father. The two of them together made an impressive picture, attractive, successful, united in their purpose. "Thank you, Dad," Amber said, taking the microphone with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I want to add my own thoughts about my big sister. Brooke and I have had our differences over the years, but I've always admired her persistence." The word was delivered with subtle mockery that drew knowing smiles from the audience. Amber continued weaving backhanded compliments into a tapestry of humiliation. "Brooke has never let reality get in the way of her dreams. She's always believed she was destined for something special, even when the evidence suggested otherwise. That kind of optimism is almost admirable in its own way." She paused, glancing toward our father, as if seeking approval for what came next. I noted that momentary hesitation, that flicker of uncertainty that revealed she was not entirely comfortable with what she was doing. The hidden cameras my team had positioned were capturing everything, including this brief crack in her facade. Which is why, Amber continued, reaching behind the podium to retrieve an elaborately wrapped box, we wanted to present Brooke with a special recognition tonight, a symbol of everything she has achieved. She held out the box toward me, her smile widening. "Brooke, would you please join us on stage to accept your award?" The invitation was delivered sweetly, but the trap was obvious to everyone. I was being summoned to participate in my own humiliation, to stand before the entire community and receive whatever mockery that box contained. They expected me to refuse and look weak, or to accept and be destroyed. Either way, they believed they had won. I surprised them by accepting immediately. I walked toward the stage without hesitation, my movements calm and unhurried. The crowd parted before me, guests stepping aside with expressions of mingled pity and curiosity. I climbed the steps with the same dignified composure I had maintained all evening, positioning myself beside my father and sister as though I belonged there. Up close, I could see the tension in both of them. My father's smile had become fixed, his eyes watchful and wary. Amber's hands trembled slightly as she held out the wrapped box. They had not expected me to approach with such confidence, and my demeanor was throwing off their carefully rehearsed performance. My mother watched from the edge of the crowd, her face pale and unreadable. Whatever she was feeling in this moment, she kept it carefully hidden. But I noticed her hands were clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Aunt Maggie had moved closer to the stage, positioning herself near the front, where she could observe everything clearly. Her expression was alert and supportive, silently communicating that she was ready to help if I needed her. And Mrs. Chen had drifted toward the AV equipment at the side of the room, her position casual but strategic. She knew what was coming. She was ready to play her part. I accepted the wrapped box from Amber's hands, feeling its weight, or rather its lack of weight. The box was essentially empty, probably containing nothing more than a piece of paper with some cruel joke printed on it. The elaborate wrapping was designed to build anticipation, to make the eventual reveal more devastating. My father leaned toward the microphone. "Go ahead, Brooke. Open your gift. Let everyone see what we think of your accomplishments." I looked at the box in my hands, then at my father, then at the crowd of faces watching with bated breath. Everyone expected me to open it. Everyone expected to witness my humiliation. Instead, I gently set the box aside and reached for the microphone. "Before I open this box," I said, my voice clear and steady, "there's something all of you need to see first." The room fell silent as my words hung in the air. My father's confident expression flickered with the first hint of uncertainty, and Amber's forced smile began to waver. Neither of them understood what was happening, but they sensed that something had shifted beyond their control. I looked toward Mrs. Chen, who stood near the AV equipment with her hand resting casually on the control panel. Our eyes met, and I gave her a small nod. Without hesitation, she pressed a button, and the large screen behind the stage flickered to life. The video began playing, immediately filling the room with images and sounds that made my family freeze in horror. The footage showed our family's living room, the camera angle slightly tilted as though recorded from a concealed position. My father sat in his favorite chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, while Amber perched on the sofa beside him. Their voices came through the speakers with devastating clarity. "We'll destroy her in front of everyone," my father was saying, his tone casual and almost cheerful. "By the time we're done, no one in this town will ever take Brooke seriously again. She'll be a laughingstock." Amber's recorded voice responded with equal enthusiasm. "The mock award is perfect. When she opens that box and sees what's inside, her face will be priceless. Everyone will finally see her for what she really is, a complete failure." Gasps erupted throughout the room. Guests who had been laughing at my father's jokes moments ago now stared at the screen with expressions of disbelief and dawning horror. The festive atmosphere evaporated instantly, replaced by the cold reality of what they were witnessing: two family members gleefully planning the public humiliation of their own daughter and sister. I watched the crowd's reaction carefully. Some people looked away, unable to meet my eyes after having participated even passively in the cruelty they had just witnessed being orchestrated. Others pulled out their phones and began recording the screen, documenting evidence that would soon spread throughout the community and beyond. The video continued, and I watched my family's faces as they were forced to confront their own words. My father had gone pale, his confident posture crumbling as he realized the magnitude of what was happening. Amber stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Then came the moment I had deliberately chosen to include. On screen, the conversation shifted. Amber's recorded voice took on a different tone, hesitant and uncomfortable. "Dad, this is too much. Maybe we should just ignore her this year. She's not hurting anyone by being here." My father's response was harsh and dismissive. "Don't be weak. She needs to learn her place. I've put up with her arrogance for too long. This ends tonight and you're going to help me or you'll find out what happens when you disappoint me." Amber's recorded face showed a flash of fear before she nodded in submission. "Okay, Dad. Whatever you say." I had included this exchange deliberately. Yes, Amber had participated in the scheme. Yes, she had spoken cruel words about me. But she had also expressed doubts, and she had been overruled and intimidated by our father. The mastermind of this humiliation was not my sister. It was the man who had controlled our entire family for decades. I glanced at Amber and saw confusion mixing with her shock. She had expected me to destroy her completely tonight. Instead, I had shown the room that she was partially a victim herself, bullied into compliance by a domineering father. I was offering her something our family had never offered me, a chance at understanding, if not forgiveness. The video ended and the screen went dark. For a moment, the room was completely silent. Then chaos erupted. My father lunged toward the AV equipment, his face contorted with rage. "Turn that off! This is doctored! She's lying!" He shoved past guests, nearly knocking over an elderly woman in his desperate attempt to reach the control panel. But Mrs. Chen had already removed the drive containing the video, and there was nothing left for him to destroy. Besides, it was far too late. I could see dozens of phones still raised, still recording, capturing not just the video, but my father's frantic reaction to it. By morning, this footage would be everywhere. The carefully constructed reputation he had built over decades was collapsing in real time, destroyed not by accusations or rumors, but by his own words, his own voice, his own undeniable cruelty. My mother had moved during the video, creating visible physical distance between herself and her husband. She stood alone near the wall, her face ashen, her body language communicating separation from the man she had stood beside for so many years. Whatever loyalty had kept her silent through decades of abuse seemed to be cracking. The community members who had admired my father, who had laughed at his jokes and accepted his self-presentation as a pillar of respectability, now looked at him with entirely different eyes. I saw disgust on faces that had shown him deference. I saw anger from people who realized they had been manipulated into participating in something ugly. I saw the small-town social order recalibrating in real time as everyone reassessed everything they thought they knew about the Whitmore family. Aunt Maggie caught my eye from the crowd and gave me a small nod of approval. Mrs. Chen had retreated to a corner, her expression one of quiet satisfaction. These women who had watched over me in silence for so long were finally seeing justice unfold. Amber remained on stage, tears streaming down her face, looking utterly lost. She made no attempt to defend our father or to attack me. She simply stood there, stripped of her confidence, forced to confront the reality of what she had participated in. I waited for the initial chaos to subside, letting the room process what they had witnessed. Then I stepped back to the microphone, and my voice cut through the noise with calm authority. That was just part one. The room had not fully recovered from the video revelation when I continued speaking. Guests were still murmuring to each other, still processing what they had witnessed, still recalibrating their understanding of my family. My father stood near the AV equipment, his face flushed with impotent rage, unable to undo what had already been seen by everyone present. "Many of you have known my family for years," I said, my voice steady and clear through the microphone. "You've seen us at community events, at church functions, at charity galas. You've accepted the image my parents have carefully cultivated, successful, respectable, financially secure. But tonight, I'm going to show you what's behind that image." I reached into the slim folder I had kept concealed at my side throughout the evening and withdrew a stack of documents. My father's eyes widened with fresh alarm as he recognized the official letterhead of the bank that held his mortgage. 3 days ago, my company Knight Strategies LLC completed the legal acquisition of my parents' entire mortgage debt from First Regional Bank. Every payment they owe, every obligation they carry on their home now belongs to me. The silence that followed was absolute. I could see confusion on some faces, shock on others, and dawning comprehension on those who understood the implications of what I had just announced. My father found his voice first. "That's impossible. You can't just buy someone's mortgage. She's lying. She's always been a liar." "I assure you it's completely legal," I responded calmly. "Banks sell distressed debt regularly. When a borrower falls behind on payments, when their loans become problematic, financial institutions often prefer to recoup what they can by selling to third parties. My company specializes in acquiring such assets." I turned back to the crowd, holding up the documents so everyone could see the official seals and signatures. What the community doesn't know is that my parents have been in serious financial trouble for years. They've refinanced their homes 7 times in the past 12 years, pulling out equity to fund a lifestyle they couldn't actually afford. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several guests who had always envied my parents' apparent prosperity now looked at them with different eyes. "But it gets worse," I continued. "During several of these refinancing transactions, my father submitted falsified income documents to qualify for loans he would never have received based on his actual earnings. He inflated his income by as much as 60% on some applications." I held up copies of the fraudulent documents, though I did not circulate them. The accusation alone was devastating enough. In this community where reputation was everything, the revelation that my father had committed financial fraud was social dynamite. "This is slander," my father shouted, pushing through the crowd toward the stage. "I'll sue you for every penny you have. These are copies of documents obtained legally through the mortgage acquisition process." I replied, unmoved by his threats. "Every claim I'm making can be verified. Your bank records, your loan applications, your payment history, it's all documented. I'm not making accusations. I'm simply presenting facts." The crowd's attention shifted between us like spectators at a tennis match, but I could see where their sympathies were landing. My father's aggressive denials, his red-faced rage, his threatening posture, all of it only reinforced the impression that he was a man caught in lies rather than a victim of false accusations. My mother had pressed herself against the wall, looking as though she wished she could disappear entirely. Whatever complicity she had maintained over the years, whatever silence she had kept, it was now costing her the social standing she had always valued so highly. "The total debt my company now owns exceeds $470,000, I said, returning to my measured tone. "That's more than the house is worth in today's market. My parents are underwater on their mortgage, surviving only because they've been making minimum payments while pretending everything is fine." I paused, letting the numbers sink in. For the older members of this community who had lived through economic hardships and understood the weight of financial irresponsibility, these revelations were particularly damning. My parents had presented themselves as models of success while secretly drowning in debt built on fraud. As the new holder of this debt, I have the legal right to demand full payment or initiate foreclosure proceedings. I could take their home tomorrow if I chose to do so. My father's face had gone from red to white. The implications of his situation were finally penetrating his rage. His failure daughter, the child he had dismissed, demeaned, and plotted to humiliate, now controlled his entire financial future. Every payment he made would go to my company. Every decision about his home would require my approval. The power dynamic between us had inverted completely. "But I'm not going to do that," I continued, and I saw a flicker of desperate hope cross his face. "At least not unless you force my hand." I looked directly at my father, then at my mother, then at Amber, who still stood frozen on the stage. "I'm not interested in making anyone homeless. I'm not interested in cruelty for its own sake. What I am interested in is accountability. For the first time in your lives, you will treat me with respect, not because you've suddenly recognized my worth, but because you finally understand that your actions have consequences." The room was utterly silent. No one coughed, no one shuffled, No one whispered. Every eye was fixed on me as I delivered the terms of a new family order. If you leave me alone, if you stop the attacks, if you never again attempt to humiliate or demean me, then you can continue living in your home and paying your mortgage as usual. But if you come after me again, if there are more social media posts, more schemes, more attempts to destroy my reputation, then I will exercise every legal right I have as your creditor. My father opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. For perhaps the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. The man who had controlled every aspect of his family through intimidation and manipulation was now completely powerless. I reached into my folder once more and withdrew the envelope Aunt Maggie had given me, the one containing my mother's hidden documents, the evidence of my father's darkest secret. "And now," I said, holding up the envelope so everyone could see, "we come to the secret you've kept for 30 years. I opened the envelope slowly, deliberately, letting the anticipation build. My father watched with growing terror, clearly trying to guess what I might have discovered, but unable to imagine the full scope of what was about to be revealed. 23 years ago, I began withdrawing the aged documents. My father served as treasurer of the Whitmore Community Children's Fund. Many of you remember that organization. It raised money for scholarships, school supplies, and summer programs for underprivileged children in our area. Several older guests nodded their expressions, showing fond memories of the charity work they had supported. What you don't know is that during his 3 years as treasurer, my father systematically embezzled more than $50,000 from that fund. Money that should have gone to children who had nothing instead went into his personal accounts. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Gasps filled the room. Heads turned toward my father with expressions of horror and disbelief. This was not just financial fraud. This was stealing from children's charities, an act that violated every principle this community held dear. "That's a lie," my father bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. "Those documents are forgeries. She fabricated all of this to destroy me." I held up the first document, a bank statement showing irregular transfers from the charity's account to a personal account bearing my father's name. "This is a certified copy of bank records from 1999 through 2002. The transfers are documented, dated, and traceable." I moved to the next document. "This is a copy of the charity's internal audit that was conducted after discrepancies were noticed. The audit was never completed because my father convinced the board that the irregularities were accounting errors. He promised to investigate personally, and somehow the matter was dropped." My father was shaking now, his entire body trembling with rage and fear. "You can't prove anything. Those records are decades old. No one can verify." "This is a letter," I interrupted, holding up a handwritten page that made my father go absolutely still, written by you to my mother approximately 20 years ago. In it, you beg her to destroy the evidence she found. You admit to taking the money. You promise to pay it back someday. And you threaten her with divorce and loss of custody if she ever reveals what she knows. I began reading aloud, my voice steady despite the emotional weight of the words. "Margaret, please destroy these documents. I made a mistake, but it was years ago and no one was truly harmed. If this comes out, it will destroy our family. Think of the girls. Think of your position in the community. I promise I will make it right someday. But you must trust me and keep silent. If you betray me, I will make sure you lose everything, the house, the children, your reputation. You know I can do it. Please, for all our sakes, let this stay buried." The room had become a tableau of frozen horror. People who had respected my father for decades now stared at him as though seeing a stranger. His own words, his own handwriting had condemned him more effectively than any accusation I could have made. On stage, Amber had collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. She had grown up hearing whispered rumors about financial troubles, vague references to difficult times in the family's past. But she had never imagined her father as a thief who stole from children and then threatened her mother into silence. "I didn't know," she kept repeating between sobs. "I didn't know. I didn't know." My father made one last desperate attempt. "Margaret!" he shouted toward my mother, who still stood frozen against the wall. "Tell them! Tell them these are lies, you know. None of this is true." But my mother did not rush to his defense. She stood motionless, her face a mask of conflicting emotions: fear, shame, and something else I could not quite identify. My mother discovered this evidence years ago. I continued addressing the crowd. She kept it hidden not to expose my father, but to protect herself and her children. She knew that if she ever tried to leave him, if she ever stood up to him, he would destroy her. So she stayed silent. She endured decades of his control, his manipulation, his cruelty, all while knowing the truth about who he really was. I turned to look directly at my father, and my next words were meant for him alone, though everyone could hear them. Mom protected you for years. She sacrificed her own freedom, her own happiness, her own voice, all to keep this family together. She gave up everything to maintain the facade you demanded. My voice dropped lower, carrying the weight of a lifetime of pain. And you never protected me. Not once. When you destroyed my artwork, when you humiliated me at every opportunity, when you planned to embarrass me in front of everyone I knew, she couldn't stop you because you had already broken her. But she still tried to give me the truth, even if she couldn't give me protection. My father's face crumpled. The anger drained away, replaced by something that might have been shame or might simply have been the realization that he had finally lost. His oldest friends in the community had stepped back from him, creating a visible circle of isolation. People who had shaken his hand and laughed at his jokes for 30 years now looked at him with disgust. I expected him to continue denying, to keep fighting, to rage against the destruction of everything he had built. Instead, something unexpected happened. My mother moved. She stepped away from the wall where she had been standing and walked toward the stage. Her movements were slow but deliberate. Her face still pale, but now set with an expression of resolve I had never seen before. The room fell silent as she climbed the steps and stood beside me. For a moment, she simply looked at my father, the man she had married, the man who had controlled her life for decades, the man whose secrets she had kept at such tremendous cost. Then she turned to the crowd and spoke in a voice that trembled but did not break. "She's telling the truth, every word, and I should have left him 20 years ago." The room seemed to hold its breath as my mother stood beside me on the stage. In all my years, I had never seen her defy my father publicly. She had always been the silent supporter, the enabler who looked away, the woman who sacrificed her own voice to maintain family peace. Now, for the first time, she was speaking her truth. "For 32 years, I have kept my husband's secrets," she began, her voice wavering but growing stronger with each word. "I knew about the embezzlement within months of when it happened. I found the bank statements, the transfer records, the discrepancies that didn't add up. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He threatened me instead." She paused, gathering herself, and I saw tears beginning to stream down her face. "He told me that if I ever spoke about what I knew, he would divorce me and take my children. He said he would tell everyone I was mentally unstable, that I was an unfit mother, that no court in this county would side with me against him. And I believed him. I was terrified. So I stayed silent." The crowd listened in stunned silence. Many of these people had known my mother for decades, had seen her at every community function, had admired her gracious hostess skills and her devoted wife persona. They had no idea about the prison she had been living in all along. "I tried to leave once," she continued. "About 15 years ago, I hired a lawyer in secret. I had divorce papers drawn up. I thought maybe I could finally escape, finally give my daughters a different example of what a woman could be." She looked at my father, and her expression hardened. "He found out. He found the papers in my purse and he confronted me. He didn't hit me. Richard was always too smart for that, too aware of how physical evidence could be used against him. But he made it very clear what would happen if I proceeded. He would destroy me financially, socially, completely. He would turn the children against me. He would make sure I had nothing. My mother turned to face me directly, and I saw decades of guilt and regret in her eyes. "Brooke, I should have been stronger. I should have found a way to protect you from him. I watched what he did to you. The criticism, the favoritism toward Amber, the way he tried to crush your spirit, and I did nothing. I was too afraid, too broken, too convinced that I had no power." Her voice cracked and tears fell freely. "I'm so sorry. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry. You deserved a mother who would fight for you, and instead you got one who couldn't even fight for herself." Something shifted inside me as I listened to her words. For so many years I had resented my mother's silence, interpreted it as indifference or complicity. Now I understood that she had been a prisoner too trapped by fear and manipulation in ways I had never fully grasped. It did not erase the pain of my childhood, but it reframed it. She had not chosen to abandon me. She had been unable to save either of us. My father had been watching this confession with growing desperation. As my mother's words landed with the crowd, as the community members he had cultivated for decades looked at him with new understanding and fresh disgust, something in him finally broke. "I was providing for this family," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Everything I did was for you, for the girls, for our future. Do you think it was easy carrying the weight of this family on my shoulders? Do you think I had choices?" But his deflections fell on deaf ears. No one was listening to his excuses anymore. The mask had been ripped away, and everyone could see the pathetic, frightened man underneath. "You had choices," I said quietly. "You chose to steal. You chose to threaten. You chose to control. You chose to abuse. Every single day you had the choice to be different, and every single day you chose cruelty." The weight of complete exposure finally became too much for him. His legs buckled and he sank to his knees on the stage, his expensive suit crumpling as he collapsed. It was not remorse that brought him down. I could see that clearly in his eyes. It was the realization that his power was gone, that his carefully constructed world had crumbled, that he had nothing left to threaten anyone with. Amber stood frozen nearby, her face streaked with tears and ruined makeup, her worldview visibly crumbling. Everything she had believed about our family, about our father, about her own position as the favored child, all of it was being dismantled in real time. She looked lost, unmoored, unable to process the revelations that kept coming. Margaret Chen stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, carrying a leather briefcase. She had been waiting for this moment, prepared with documents we had assembled over the past weeks. She climbed the stage steps with professional composure and set the briefcase on a nearby table. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "I represent your daughter in various legal and financial matters. I have here documents that will formalize the new arrangements for your family's finances." She opened the briefcase and withdrew a stack of papers. "These documents acknowledge your existing debts to Knight Strategies LLC, establish a repayment schedule for the mortgage, and transfer certain decision-making authorities regarding family assets to your daughter. You have 72 hours to sign them." My father looked up from his knees, his face gray with defeat. "And if I refuse?" "Then copies of the embezzlement evidence will be forwarded to the district attorney's office," I said. "The statute of limitations may have passed for some charges, but financial fraud has a way of connecting to other matters. Tax implications, for instance. And regardless of legal consequences, the documentation will become public record available to anyone who wants to verify what happened here tonight." He stared at the documents Margaret held out, understanding that this was not a negotiation. This was surrender or destruction, his only options. With trembling hands, he reached for the pen. The scratch of his signature against paper was the only sound in the room, and it marked the end of everything he had built on lies and intimidation. When he finished signing, I turned to face my sister, who still stood paralyzed on the stage. "We're not finished," I said. "You have a choice to make." Amber flinched when I spoke her name, as though expecting another blow. She had watched our father collapse, had heard our mother's devastating confession, had seen everything she believed about our family dismantled piece by piece. Now she stood before me like a defendant awaiting sentencing, her earlier confidence completely shattered. I studied my sister carefully. Part of me wanted to destroy her the way she had tried to destroy me. She had participated willingly in years of cruelty, had laughed at my pain, had helped orchestrate tonight's planned humiliation. Justice would have been served if I had exposed her role completely and left her to face the community's judgment alone. But the video had shown me something important. Amber had expressed doubts. She had tried to suggest an alternative only to be overruled and intimidated by our father. She was cruel, yes, but she was also a product of the same toxic environment that had damaged me. Our father had shaped her into his instrument, rewarding her compliance with love and approval, while punishing any hint of independence. I was not my father. I would not use power simply to destroy. Amber, I said, keeping my voice measured and serious rather than triumphant. You have a choice to make. Not tonight, I'm giving you 48 hours to think about it. But you need to understand what your options are. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes, mascara streaked down her cheeks, her perfect appearance ruined by the evening's revelations. Option 1, you can continue down the path you've been on. You can keep defending Dad, keep pretending nothing happened here, keep being his puppet. If you choose that, I won't pursue you legally or financially. But I also won't have any relationship with you. You'll be on your own dealing with the consequences of tonight, however you can. I paused, letting her absorb this before continuing. Option 2, you can start over. I'm offering you a job at Night Strategies, starting at the entry level. You'll work your way up like anyone else based on merit and effort. You'll learn what it means to earn something instead of having it handed to you. And maybe over time you'll become someone different than who Dad made you. Amber's mouth opened, but no words came out. She had clearly expected punishment, not opportunity. I'm not offering you forgiveness, I clarified. You participated in cruelty toward me for years. That doesn't disappear because you cried tonight. But I am offering you a chance, the same chance our father never gave me when I was struggling to build my life. What you do with that chance is entirely up to you. I turned to address the room more broadly, knowing that word of what I said next would spread throughout the community within hours. There will be changes in how this family operates. My parents' home will be sold. The proceeds after debts are satisfied will go toward establishing a trust that I will oversee. My parents will move to a modest apartment and live within their actual means, something they should have done years ago instead of building a lifestyle on fraud and borrowed money. Some guests looked uncomfortable at this public declaration of my family's new circumstances. Others nodded with what appeared to be approval, people who valued accountability and disliked seeing those who cheated the system avoid consequences. Any funds my parents need for legitimate expenses, medical care, basic living costs will be available through the trust. But the days of maintaining false appearances are over. They will live honestly, or they will not have access to resources that could enable further deception. My father, still on his knees, looked up with desperate eyes. Brooke, please. The embezzlement, if that becomes public, if it goes to authorities, I could face charges. I could go to prison. Please, I'm begging you, keep that between us. I looked down at the man who had terrorized my childhood, who had crushed my dreams and controlled my mother and shaped my sister into a weapon against me. He was pathetic now, stripped of all the power he had wielded so ruthlessly. Part of me wanted to see him face the full legal consequences of his actions. But another part of me remembered my grandmother's teachings. Quiet strength, measured responses, victory without becoming the monster you fought against. I'm not going to report the embezzlement to authorities, I said, and I saw a flash of relief cross his face before I continued. Unless you give me reason to. Consider this the mercy that Mom showed you for 30 years, mercy you never deserved and never appreciated. I leaned closer so only he could hear my next words, though I suspected the nearby guests were straining to listen. If you ever come after me again, if there are any more schemes, Any more social media attacks? Any attempts to undermine me or retaliate for what happened tonight? The documentation goes straight to the district attorney. You will spend whatever years you have left dealing with criminal investigations and legal consequences. That is not a threat. It is a promise. He nodded weakly, all fight gone from him. Do you understand? I pressed. Yes, he whispered. I understand. I straightened and stepped back, signaling that the public portion of the evening was concluding. The crowd had begun to disperse, guests leaving in small groups already discussing what they had witnessed. By morning, every detail would be known throughout the community. My father's reputation was destroyed, but he was not in prison. My family was restructured, but not homeless. Justice had been served with restraint, rather than vengeance. I caught Amber's eye and gestured for her to follow me to a quiet corner away from the remaining guests. She came hesitantly, clearly uncertain what to expect. There's something else you need to know, I said quietly once we were out of earshot. Something about Mom that will change everything you think you understand about our family. Amber's eyes widened with fresh apprehension. What do you mean? What else could there possibly be? I reached into my folder and withdrew the journal pages Aunt Maggie had preserved our mother's private writings from years of silent suffering. Mom kept a record, I said, of everything. Her thoughts, her fears, her desperate attempts to protect us in the only ways she could. You need to see this, Amber. You need to understand what she sacrificed and why. We found a small anteroom off the main hall away from the remaining guests and the chaos of the evening's revelations. Amber followed me with the hesitant steps of someone expecting another confrontation, her arms wrapped around herself as though trying to hold together pieces that were falling apart. I closed the door behind us and withdrew the journal pages from my folder. These were copies I had made from the materials Aunt Maggie provided our mother's private writings hidden for years, documenting the reality of her marriage in ways she could never speak aloud. Before you read these, I said, I want you to understand something. Mom wasn't the weak woman we both thought she was. She was surviving in the only way she knew how in a situation where she had almost no power. What you're about to see will change how you understand our entire childhood. I handed Amber the pages and she began reading with trembling hands. The journal entries spanned nearly 2 decades, written in our mother's careful handwriting during stolen moments when our father was away. They documented everything: his controlling behavior, his financial manipulation, his threats whenever she showed any sign of independence. But they also revealed something neither of us had known. Our mother had been secretly saving money for years. Small amounts carefully hidden from our father's obsessive oversight of their finances. A few dollars here and there from grocery money. Cash back from purchases that she reported at face value. Birthday money from relatives that she claimed to have spent on household needs. Over 20 years, these tiny acts of financial rebellion had accumulated into a modest fund that she kept in a separate account under her maiden name. She was building an escape fund. Amber whispered, her voice breaking as she read. All those years she was trying to save enough to leave him. Keep reading, I said. The later entries became more desperate. Our mother wrote about watching her daughters grow up in a toxic environment, about her guilt for being unable to protect us, about her fear that we would be damaged by our father's cruelty. She documented specific incidents, times when she tried to intervene on my behalf, and was shut down times when she attempted to moderate our father's favoritism toward Amber, and was overruled. One entry made Amber stop completely, her hand covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. I tried to protect both my girls even when they couldn't see it, she read aloud. Richard turned them against each other so effectively Amber became his weapon against Brooke, and Brooke learned to hate her sister for crimes that were really her father's. I hope someday they can forgive each other and take care of each other. That's all I ever wanted. If I couldn't give them a healthy family, maybe they can build one together after I'm gone. Amber looked up at me, her face a mask of anguish and dawning comprehension. She was fighting for both of us, she said. All those years I thought she didn't care that she was just Dad's shadow, but she was trying to protect us in ways we couldn't see. She couldn't protect us openly, I said. Every time she tried, Dad shut her down and made things worse. So she did what she could in secret, saved money, kept evidence, tried to document the truth in case we ever needed it. Amber sank into a chair, clutching the journal pages like they were precious artifacts. I sided with him, against her, against you. I became exactly what he wanted me to be, his perfect daughter, his weapon against anyone who challenged him. I hurt you for years, and I didn't even understand why. She looked up at me with raw vulnerability in her eyes. Why are you showing me this? After everything I did, why give me another chance? You could have destroyed me tonight. You had every right to. The question deserved an honest answer. Because Mom would have wanted me to, I said simply. The words hung in the air between us, carrying the weight of our mother's hopes and the possibility of a different future. She wanted us to take care of each other, I continued. She knew that Dad had turned us into enemies, and her greatest wish was that someday we would find our way back to being sisters. I'm not doing this because you deserve it. You participated in years of cruelty, and that doesn't disappear overnight. I'm doing this because honoring Mom's memory means trying to build something better than what we came from. Amber was silent for a long moment, processing everything she had learned. When she finally spoke, her voice was stronger than I expected. I'll take the job, she said, at Night Strategies, entry level, starting from nothing. I'll earn whatever I get, and I won't expect special treatment. It won't be easy, I warned. You'll be working alongside people who have no idea who you are or what our family history is. You'll be judged on your performance, not your name. I know. She met my eyes with something that looked almost like determination. I've never actually earned anything in my life. Everything I have came from being Dad's favorite, from playing the role he assigned me. Maybe it's time I found out who I am when I'm not performing for him. It was not forgiveness. It was not even trust. But it was a beginning, a first step toward the reconciliation our mother had dreamed of, but never lived to see. I extended my hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Amber took it. Her grip was firm, her palm still damp with tears. We start fresh, I said. Not as the people Dad made us, but as the people we choose to become. Before she could respond, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Margaret, and something in the urgency of the ringtone made me answer immediately. Brooke, Margaret's voice was tight with controlled excitement. I've been going through the additional materials Maggie provided, and I found something. Another document your mother left, one that was sealed separately from the rest. What does it say? It explains those mysterious payments your father was making for years, the ones to Eleanor Vance. Margaret paused. Brooke, you need to see this in person. It changes everything. 1 month had passed since the Christmas party that changed everything. The winter had settled into a quiet rhythm, the holiday chaos giving way to the slower pace of January. Snow blanketed the city in white muffling sounds and creating a sense of peaceful isolation that matched my contemplative mood. So much had happened, so much had changed, and now came the harder work of building something new from the wreckage of the old. My parents had moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town. The house where I had grown up, where so much pain had been inflicted and so many secrets hidden, was now on the market. A real estate agent conducted showings while strangers walked through rooms that held decades of family history, evaluating square footage and natural light without any awareness of the drama those walls had witnessed. I visited my parents once during the move, helping to sort through belongings and decide what would fit in their smaller space. My father barely spoke to me. He moved through the process like a ghost, diminished and sullen, stripped of the authority he had wielded like a weapon for so many years. The man who had once commanded every room he entered now seemed to shrink into himself, avoiding eye contact and answering questions in monosyllables. His social standing in the community was destroyed beyond repair. The revelations from the Christmas party had spread through the small-town gossip network with devastating efficiency. Old friends stopped calling. Business associates found excuses to cancel meetings. The invitations to community events that had once filled his calendar simply stopped arriving. He was not in prison, but he was in exile, cut off from everything that had given his life meaning. My mother surprisingly seemed lighter. For the first time in over 3 decades, she had her own bank account. She had her own phone with a number that was not monitored or controlled by anyone else. She made her own decisions about how to spend her days, what to eat for dinner, when to go to bed. These small freedoms, which most people took for granted, were revelations to a woman who had lived under financial and emotional control for her entire adult life. We began meeting for coffee every Saturday morning at a quiet cafe halfway between her new apartment and my penthouse. The first few meetings were awkward, filled with long silences and tentative conversation. Neither of us knew how to be with each other outside the toxic family dynamics that had defined our relationship for so long. But gradually, week by week, something began to shift. My mother started sharing stories I had never heard memories from before. Her marriage dreams she had abandoned, regrets she had carried silently for decades. I listened without judgment, trying to understand the woman she had been before my father broke her spirit. "I wanted to be a teacher," she told me during one of our coffees, her hands wrapped around her cup for warmth. "Did you know that before I met your father, I was studying education? I wanted to work with children to help them discover their potential." I had not known this. In all my years growing up, I had never heard my mother express any ambition beyond managing our household. "What happened?" I asked. She smiled sadly. "Your father happened. He was charming and confident, and seemed to have everything figured out. He convinced me that his plans were better than mine, that being his wife would be more fulfilling than any career. By the time I realized my mistake, I had 2 children and no way out." These conversations were painful but necessary. We were excavating the truth of our family history, examining wounds that had festered for years, beginning the slow process of healing. I did not know if I would ever fully forgive her for failing to protect me, but I was beginning to understand why she had been unable to fight back. Amber's transformation was equally remarkable, though far more difficult. She had started at night strategies in the mailroom just as I had offered. Her first day was a study in culture shock, the privileged daughter who had never worked a real job in her life suddenly sorting packages and delivering inter-office correspondence alongside employees half her age. She wore simple clothes instead of designer labels. She brought her lunch in a brown bag instead of ordering from expensive restaurants. She answered to supervisors who had no idea she was related to the company's CEO and would not have cared if they did. The adjustment was brutal. I received reports from Patricia, who had taken Amber under her wing as I had hoped she would. The first 2 weeks were especially hard. Amber made mistakes, struggled with basic office procedures, and frequently looked on the verge of tears. Several times, Patricia told me Amber had gone to the bathroom and not emerged for 20 minutes, clearly crying in private rather than showing weakness in front of her colleagues. But she did not quit. That fact alone told me something important about my sister. Beneath the cruelty and entitlement that our father had cultivated in her, there was something else, a core of determination that had never been tested because she had never needed to try. Now, for the first time in her life, she was being forced to earn her place rather than having it handed to her. By the end of the first month, Amber had progressed from the mailroom to an entry-level administrative position. Patricia reported that she was learning quickly, asking good questions, and treating her colleagues with a respect that seemed genuine rather than performed. The workplace was becoming something she had never experienced in our family, an environment based on merit, accountability, and mutual respect. We had dinner together once, Amber and I, at a quiet restaurant where we could talk without being overheard. She looked different than she had at Christmas, less polished, more tired, but also somehow more real. The sister I had grown up with had always seemed like a performance. This version of Amber, exhausted and uncertain, but pushing forward anyway, felt more authentic. "It's the hardest thing I've ever done," she admitted over her salad. "Every day I want to quit. Every day I think about how much easier my life was when I just did whatever Dad wanted. But then I remember what he really was, what I helped him do to you, and I know I can't go back to being that person." I did not offer false comfort or easy forgiveness, but I acknowledged her effort, and that seemed to be enough for now. It was during one of my Saturday coffees with my mother that Margaret arrived with the final piece of the puzzle. She walked into the cafe with her briefcase and an expression that told me she had discovered something significant. I introduced her to my mother, and the three of us moved to a private corner where we could speak without being overheard. "I've finished analyzing all the documents from your mother's hidden files." Margaret began withdrawing a folder from her briefcase. Most of it confirmed what we already knew: the embezzlement, the financial control, the threats. But there was one sealed envelope that took time to properly examine. She placed several documents on the table between us. "Those mysterious payments your father made for 7 years, the ones to Eleanor Vance, I traced them through bank records and public documents." Margaret paused, her expression serious. "Eleanor Vance gave birth to a daughter approximately 42 years ago. The timing and the payment patterns suggest that your father was providing support for a child." I stared at her, processing the implications. "You're saying my father had another daughter?" "The evidence strongly suggests it. A daughter roughly your age living in another state under her mother's surname. Your mother discovered the affair and the child, and she documented everything. Based on her notes, she planned to use this information if she ever found the courage to leave proof that your father had violated their marriage and maintained a secret family for years." My mother had gone pale across the table. "I knew," she whispered. "I found out about 15 years ago. I confronted Richard and he swore it was over, that the payments were just obligation, guilt money. I wanted to believe him." "The payments stopped 7 years ago," Margaret continued, "around the time Eleanor Vance passed away. But the daughter, her name is Sarah, is still alive. She's 41 years old, living in Portland, working as an architect." I had a half-sister, a woman my own age who shared my father's blood but had grown up in completely different circumstances. Did she know about us? Had she spent her life wondering about the family her father had chosen over her? "There's one more thing," Margaret said. "The money your mother saved over the years, the hidden fund she built in secret, I traced its source. It wasn't from grocery money or birthday gifts, as she wrote in her journal. The seed money came from an inheritance she received from her mother, your grandmother, shortly after she passed away. Legally inherited money is separate property. It belonged entirely to your mother, and your father had no claim to it. She was smarter than anyone gave her credit for. My grandmother, even in death, had provided the tools for my mother to fight back. The legacy of quiet strength passed from generation to generation. I was still absorbing all of this when my phone buzzed with a notification from my building's concierge. A delivery had arrived at my penthouse, an anonymous package with no return address. I returned to my penthouse that evening to find a small cardboard box waiting on my doorstep. The concierge had brought it up as instructed, and it sat there innocuously, giving no indication of the emotional earthquake it contained. There was no return address, no shipping label from any recognizable carrier, just my name written in careful handwriting that seemed vaguely familiar. I brought the package inside and set it on my kitchen counter, staring at it for several minutes before finding the courage to open it. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a photograph. The woman in the image looked remarkably like me. She had the same bone structure, the same slight curve to her smile, the same intelligent eyes that seemed to assess the camera rather than simply pose for it. She appeared to be in her early 40s, standing in front of a modern building that might have been an architecture firm. On the back of the photograph, someone had written a name and a date: Sarah Vance, last spring. My half-sister, the daughter my father had hidden from us for over 4 decades. Beneath the photograph lay a stack of legal documents yellowed with age. I recognized them immediately as divorce papers, the same papers my mother had told the Christmas party crowd she had prepared years ago, but never filed. They were complete, signed by her, requiring only my father's signature and a filing date to become official. Attached to the papers was a note in my mother's handwriting. The sight of her familiar script made my throat tighten. "Her name is Sarah. She deserves to know the truth too. When you're ready, find her. Take care of each other. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to bring you together myself. Maybe you can build the family I never could. All my love, Mom." Something broke inside me. For the entire ordeal, the dinner, the Christmas party, the confrontations and revelations and restructuring, I had maintained my composure. I had been strategic controlled, never allowing my emotions to overwhelm my judgment. I had cried briefly when reading my mother's journal, but even then, I had held back, keeping part of myself protected. Now, alone in my penthouse with this package in my hands, I finally let go. I sank to the floor and wept. I cried for the mother who had suffered in silence, who had fought in the only ways she could, who had loved me even when I thought she did not care. I cried for the childhood I had lost, for the years of cruelty and dismissal that had shaped me in ways I was still discovering. I cried for the sister I had never known, who had grown up without a father's presence because he had chosen us over her. And I cried for myself, for the little girl who had only wanted to be loved, who had created beautiful art that was destroyed, who had built an empire from nothing because no one believed she could. The tears seemed endless, drawing from a well of grief I had not known existed. For the first time in my adult life, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of everything, the anger, the sadness, the love, the loss, and now this unexpected gift of connection. When the tears finally subsided, I felt lighter. Something had released some burden I had carried so long I had forgotten it was there. The next morning, I drove to my childhood home one last time. The new owners were moving in their furniture being unloaded from a large truck while their children ran across the lawn with the excitement of a fresh start. They were a young family, a couple in their 30s with 2 little girls who looked to be about 5 and 7. They had no idea what had happened within these walls, what secrets the house had held, what pain had been inflicted in its rooms. I parked across the street and watched for a while, seeing my childhood home through new eyes. The garden where my mother had found brief moments of peace. The window of my bedroom where I had cried myself to sleep so many nights. The garage where my father had parked his car announcing his return with the sound of the engine that always made my stomach clench with anxiety. For so long, this house had represented everything that wounded me. It was the physical manifestation of my family's dysfunction, the stage where all our traumas had played out. I had feared it, resented it, dreamed of it in nightmares even as an adult. But standing here now, watching strangers fill it with new furniture and new hopes, I realized something profound. This house did not define me anymore. I defined me. The building was just wood and brick and glass. The power it had held over me existed only in my mind, in the memories I had allowed to shape my identity. I was not the broken girl who had fled this place at 18. I was a woman who had built her own life, faced her demons, and emerged victorious, not through cruelty or vengeance, but through strength, integrity, and the quiet power my grandmother had taught me to cultivate. I had broken the cycle. The abuse that had damaged my mother, that had been inflicted on me, that had warped my sister, it ended here. Whatever family I built going forward would be different. It would be based on honesty, respect, and love, freely given rather than conditionally withheld. I whispered to myself, "This house doesn't define me anymore. I define me." As I prepared to drive away, I noticed a woman standing on the sidewalk about 50 feet away. She was watching me with an intensity that made me pause. Something about her seemed familiar, the way she held herself, the shape of her face, the curious tilt of her head. Our eyes met across the distance. She had my grandmother's eyes. The same warm brown, the same depth of intelligence and compassion that I saw in my own mirror every morning. Recognition sparked between us, instant and undeniable, even though we had never met. Sarah. It had to be Sarah. She held up a photograph, showing it to me across the space that separated us. Even from this distance, I could make out the image, an elderly woman with her arms around 2 young girls, one on each side. Our grandmother, I realized, with both of her granddaughters. A photograph I had never seen from a moment I had never known existed. Neither of us moved to close the distance. Neither of us spoke. But Sarah's face slowly transformed into a tentative smile, hopeful, uncertain, reaching out across decades of separation. I smiled back. Then I remembered the package. In my emotional upheaval, I had not examined everything inside. I reached into my purse where I had placed the contents and found one more item at the bottom, a small note card I had overlooked. 3 words were written in handwriting I did not recognize. "This isn't over." And that satisfying moment when Brooke's father fell to his knees when her mother finally found her voice, when the community saw the truth behind 30 years of lies. That is why stories like this matter. Because sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who were supposed to love us. And sometimes the only way to heal is to stop being silent. Brooke didn't destroy her family. She freed herself from them. She broke a cycle of abuse that had damaged 3 generations of women, and she did it not through cruelty or vengeance, but through the quiet strength her grandmother taught her. That note card with those 3 words, "This isn't over," tells us that Sarah's story is just beginning. A half-sister Brooke never knew existed. A woman who grew up wondering why her father chose another family over her. 2 daughters of the same man, both wounded in different ways, now standing on opposite sides of the street, with a chance to build something neither of them ever had. A real family, built on truth instead of lies, on choice instead of obligation. So I have to ask you, what would you have done in Brooke's place? Would you have exposed everything at that Christmas party? Would you have offered Amber a second chance? Would you have reached out to Sarah? Or would you have been too afraid of what you might find? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and some of the best discussions happen right there in the comment section. And if this story moved you, if you felt that satisfaction when Brooke finally got her moment, if you understood the weight of what her mother sacrificed, if you're curious about what happens next with Sarah, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. Because this story, it really isn't over. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for being part of this journey. And remember, your story isn't over either. No matter what anyone has told you about who you are or what you're worth, you define yourself. Until next time.